Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to Soft History Stories, where we dive deep into the fascinating and often hidden corners of history, exploring events that shaped the world in ways we might never have imagined. If you're new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. And if you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. Now, imagine a time when society believed that the right medication could cure anything. Whether it was a headache, sleeplessness, or even the emotional turmoil of a woman's daily life, medicine was seen as the answer to every problem. Welcome to the Victorian era, a time of immense progress, industrialization, and sadly, a widespread reliance on pharmaceutical remedies, many of which would become the very cause of an unexpected and largely overlooked epidemic. This was an age where opiates, including morphine and the famously dangerous laudanum, were prescribed freely, especially for women, without a second thought about their addictive qualities. At the heart of this pharmaceutical obsession was the belief that these substances could alleviate everything from physical discomfort to the delicate emotional distress that was so often attributed to women. And so, doctors, in their best intentions, turned to opiates as the solution to the various struggles that women faced, from nervousness and grief to the burdens of motherhood and the weight of societal expectations. What was meant to be a cure soon spiraled into a widespread dependence, and the once trusted medications became a slow-burning epidemic that would affect countless lives, particularly those of women. But this story isn't just about medicine. It's about how a society's trust in the medical profession and its failure to recognize the dangers of pharmaceutical addiction allowed an invisible epidemic to flourish. It's about how women, already burdened by the rigid roles they were expected to play in Victorian society, became caught in the grip of addiction, often without even realizing it. These substances were not just medications. They were lifelines, offering temporary relief from the overwhelming pressures of daily life. But that relief came at a high cost, a cost that would not only affect the health of women, but also their families, their societal roles, and their futures. As we journey through this dark chapter in history, we'll uncover how this pharmaceutical dependence became deeply embedded in Victorian culture, the profound effects it had on women's health, and how it led to the eventual reckoning with addiction as a societal problem. So, sit back, relax, and let's explore this hidden history together. But before we dive in, don't forget to like and share this video with anyone who might be fascinated by this untold story. And feel free to comment below with your thoughts or questions. Now, let's step into the world of Victorian pharmaceutical culture and discover how an era's obsession with opiates shaped the lives of those who lived through it. In the heart of Victorian society, medicine was a revered institution. Doctors, with their authoritative presence, carried the weight of respectability and scientific knowledge. For many, a visit to the doctor was not just a consultation, it was an encounter with expertise, a moment where one's troubles could be soothed and alleviated by the careful hands of a trained professional. But in the shadows of this trust, a quiet epidemic was taking root, one that would affect the lives of countless women, destabilize families, and leave a lasting mark on medical practice. The substance at the center of this epidemic was opium, and its widespread use in Victorian England was not merely a medical oversight. It was a tragedy born out of ignorance and societal expectations, with long-lasting consequences that would resonate for generations to come. As you step into the world of 19th century England, imagine the pressures and demands that women faced. Victorian society had very clear expectations for women. They were to be perfect wives, doting mothers, and pillars of moral virtue. They were expected to embody grace, composure, and restraint in all aspects of life, from their attire to the way they managed their households. But beneath this idealized image of womanhood, there were real struggles. Women often faced physical and emotional distress that was not acknowledged by society or by the medical community. The struggles of everyday life, the loss of children, the emotional toll of motherhood, and the pressure of societal expectations often took a heavy toll on women's mental and physical health. But society had no real vocabulary for acknowledging or addressing these struggles beyond labeling them as nervous conditions, hysteria, or female weakness. For many women like you, the doctor's office was the first place to turn when these hidden struggles became unbearable. You would have found yourself walking into a quiet, dimly lit room, seeking relief from the overwhelming fatigue, anxiety, or sadness that weighed heavily on your shoulders. The treatment your doctor offered may have seemed like a simple, benign remedy, an opiate tincture, most likely laudanum, to ease your nerves, calm your troubled mind, and soothe the physical ailments you were experiencing. Opium-based products like laudanum were prescribed for everything from insomnia and menstrual pain to grief and emotional distress. It was advertised as a miracle drug, offering quick relief and comfort to those in need. At first, the effects were subtle but promising. You felt a sense of relief that had previously eluded you. The exhaustion from your daily responsibilities seemed to fade, and the anxiety that had plagued you for years dissipated into a warm, comforting haze. In a world where women were expected to endure and maintain a sense of calm quietly, opium provided a solution to the overwhelming burden of daily life. With a few drops of laudanum, the emotional turmoil and physical discomfort you had been experiencing seemed manageable, even alleviated. It was a perfect fix for a world that demanded so much of you, a society that pushed you to be constantly on, constantly composed, constantly in control. But what you didn't know, and what doctors of the time didn't realize, was that what began as a simple, harmless remedy was quickly becoming something far more insidious. As you continued to take laudanum, your body began to build a tolerance. The relief you once felt began to fade, and you found yourself needing more to achieve the same sense of calm. What had once been an occasional remedy for sleeplessness or anxiety soon became a daily necessity. Without it, you would feel restless, uneasy, and unable to cope with the demands of daily life. You didn't recognize it as addiction. You just knew you needed it to function, to get through the day, to survive in a world that didn't make space for your emotional fragility. This is where the tragedy of the opium epidemic lies. In the unacknowledged dependency that grew in the shadows of Victorian society. Doctors, despite their supposed expertise, were blind to the addictive nature of opium. The medical profession, despite its authority, failed to recognize what they were prescribing, and, in many cases, they became dependent on the same drugs they gave to their patients. The very physicians who were meant to heal were often taking opium themselves, unable to see the long-term dangers of a substance that had been marketed as a simple remedy. You were not the only one caught in the grip of this substance. Women, particularly, became the targets of opium prescriptions, often prescribed laudanum to treat emotional distress, anxiety, or the general weariness that came with the exhausting demands of motherhood and domestic life. Doctors saw these issues as something to be managed with drugs, believing that women's emotional distress was part of their natural condition. What doctors failed to recognize, however, was that many of these ailments were deeply rooted in a society that placed unrealistic expectations on women's emotional and physical well-being. The pressures to remain calm, to suppress natural emotions like grief and frustration, created a perfect storm for dependency, and opium was the tool used to manage it. The medical profession, rather than helping, had become complicit in perpetuating the very crisis it was meant to alleviate. Doctors who prescribed opium were often unaware of the addictive potential of the drug or simply ignored it. Opium was seen as an effective way to soothe what was perceived as the fragile nature of women, to calm their nerves, to give them respite from the emotional chaos of daily life. And because so many women were suffering from similar emotional burdens that were largely unacknowledged by society, opium became the go-to treatment, almost an automatic response to complaints of anxiety or distress. But there was another tragic layer to this epidemic. Many doctors, just as dependent on the drug as their patients, saw nothing wrong with its use. The prevalence of opium use among doctors and the medical community as a whole normalized the practice of prescribing it. Physicians who became addicted to opiates themselves often couldn't recognize the dangers of the drug, not only because they were taking it, but because addiction, at the time, was not understood as a medical issue. The idea that a person could be chemically dependent on a substance was, at best, in its infancy, and the notion of addiction as a disease had not yet entered the collective medical consciousness. In some ways, the addiction that quietly consumed society went unnoticed because it was so normalized within the medical community. If the very people who were supposed to heal you were the ones prescribing the drug, how could you, or anyone else, recognize the danger? For women, especially, this created a trap that was hard to escape. The drugs were prescribed in good faith, with the belief that they were simply helping to manage the pressures of life. But over time, the dosage required to achieve the same effects grew, and the addiction deepened. What began as a medical solution soon became an inescapable cycle of dependence. The medical community, despite its revered position in Victorian society, was blind to the harm it was causing. Physicians who should have been aware of the risks of opium addiction were instead perpetuating a culture of dependency, prescribing the drug to countless women without recognizing its addictive qualities. They failed to see that the very substance they believed to be a cure was in fact making the situation worse. In their efforts to help, they had unknowingly set the stage for an epidemic that would sweep across the nation, leaving a trail of wrecked lives in its wake. You, like countless other women, may have found yourself caught in this silent epidemic. As you continued to take laudanum, relying on it to get through your days, you were unaware of the toll it was taking on your body, your mind, and your future. Addiction, at the time, was not seen as a disease but as a weakness. The stigma surrounding it was so powerful that it kept you from seeking help. In a world where women were expected to maintain their composure at all costs, admitting that you were dependent on a substance was unthinkable. You, like many others, would have suffered in silence, unable to break free from the cycle of dependency, trapped by a drug that promised relief but delivered only further suffering. As the epidemic grew, it became clear that this was not just an isolated problem. It was a widespread issue that affected not only women but the very structure of Victorian society. The very medical system that was supposed to care for you had become complicit in your suffering. The opium epidemic, born from ignorance and the normalization of addiction within the medical community, left a legacy that would haunt generations to come. It was a silent epidemic, one that crept through the lives of so many without anyone truly understanding the harm it was causing. But this ignorance would eventually give way to awareness. The growing realization of addiction's true nature, its complex medical foundations, would change the way we understood and treated addiction. And as the story unfolds, we'll see how this realization sets the stage for the transformation of addiction from a moral failing to a recognized medical condition. The struggle, however, was far from over, and the battle against addiction had only just begun. The fight for understanding, for compassion, and for proper treatment would stretch far beyond the Victorian era, but its roots can be traced back to the quiet, hidden epidemic that unfolded in the homes and offices of Victorian England. You find yourself walking through the streets of Victorian England, where the bustling city is alive with energy and change. The air is thick with the promise of progress, yet beneath the surface, a quiet storm is brewing, one that affects women like you in ways society barely acknowledges. In a time when being a woman meant silently bearing the weight of emotional and physical burdens, it was not uncommon for women like you to feel overwhelmed by the demands of daily life. Whether it was the relentless work at home, the emotional toll of raising children, or the grief of losing a loved one, there were few outlets to express the pain you felt. You were expected to remain composed, graceful, and serene, no matter the storm inside you. At first, there was hope. Doctors, those revered men of science, promised relief from the turmoil. They were men who held the keys to healing, who could offer solutions for every ailment, no matter how subtle or severe. The answer, they told you, was in the medicine specifically, in opiates like laudanum, a seemingly harmless tincture that promised to ease your pain, to calm your nerves, to lift the weight off your weary shoulders. For the first time in a long while, you felt a sense of relief. The nervousness that had gripped you, the restlessness that kept you awake at night, faded into a gentle fog. You were able to breathe easier, your thoughts slowing, your body finally relaxing. It was a blessing, you thought. The relief was instant, and it seemed almost miraculous. But as you continued to rely on the laudanum, a subtle shift began to occur. The once soothing effects didn't last as long as they used to. You needed more, just a little more, to feel that same sense of peace. Slowly, without realizing it, you became dependent. The very medicine that was meant to heal you was quietly taking control of your life, and you, like so many others, hadn't noticed until it was too late. But you were not alone. You see, the streets around you, the very society you lived in, were filled with women suffering in the same way. Women who had once trusted the medical system to relieve their struggles now found themselves trapped in a cycle of dependency. What had been intended as a cure had instead become a chain. And though the world around you was busy with the advancements of the age, some had begun to see the truth of what was happening. Amidst the quiet despair, there arose a voice, a collective of voices, actually who were no longer willing to stay silent. These were women like you, who had suffered the consequences of this so-called remedy, and were determined to make their voices heard. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU, had long been fighting for the rights of women, but as the opium epidemic deepened, they shifted their focus. They began to see the dangerous intersection of women's health and the pharmaceutical industry, recognizing that opium addiction was just another way society was exploiting women's vulnerabilities. They were determined to stop it. As you listened to their calls for change, their words resonated with you. You weren't the only one. There were many like you silent sufferers who had been quietly given the drug that now controlled their lives. But now, there was a way forward. The WCTU and other grassroots movements were gaining traction, drawing attention to the issue of pharmaceutical addiction. These women, once constrained by the very same societal expectations that had held them in check, now stood as a force, pushing for reform. Their voices were becoming stronger, louder, and more impossible to ignore. Soon, the letters started to arrive, letters from women who, like you, had been caught in the clutches of addiction. They poured their hearts out, sharing their stories of dependency, of how they had been promised relief but found only entrapment. These letters were not just personal testimonies. They were cries for help, calls for change. The courage it took to put pen to paper was immense after all. How could you speak out when you were trapped in the shame of your own addiction? Yet these women did, and their stories gave birth to a movement. You are swept up in this momentum, feeling the surge of solidarity, the power that comes with realizing that you are not alone. The stories of women like you who had once been forced to suffer in silence now had a platform. These testimonies, filled with raw emotion, painted a vivid picture of the exploitation women faced at the hands of the medical profession. Doctors, once seen as infallible healers, had unknowingly, or perhaps willfully, become complicit in the widespread addiction that had quietly gripped so many. They had prescribed opiates to ease pain, to calm nerves, but they had failed to see the long-term consequences. They had failed to recognize addiction as a disease, not a moral failing. As you read the letters, you realize that these women were not just victims, they were warriors. They fought for change in a world that had cast them aside, that had ignored their suffering. They became the face of a movement, one that demanded accountability from the medical community, the pharmaceutical industry, and society at large. It was not just about addiction, it was about women's rights, about the right to be heard, to be treated with respect, and to live free from the hidden chains of dependency. The WCTU, along with the growing network of activists, took their fight to the streets, to the courts, and to the government. They pressed for laws that would regulate the sale and distribution of opiates, that would ensure women were no longer used as guinea pigs for the pharmaceutical industry's experiments. They wanted transparency. No longer should products be marketed as harmless remedies without full knowledge of their dangers. And as their efforts grew stronger, they began to make waves. The push for reform culminated in the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, a landmark piece of legislation that would forever change the way drugs were sold and regulated in the United States. While it did not focus exclusively on opiates, it was the first major step toward a more regulated pharmaceutical system, one that would prevent the kinds of widespread exploitation that had affected women for so long. This act mandated that all ingredients in food and drugs be disclosed to the public, giving consumers the information they needed to make informed decisions about the products they were using. For you, the passing of the Pure Food and Drug Act felt like a victory, a small but meaningful win in the battle against the system that had failed so many. But even more than that, it was a recognition of the voices of women whose resistance had once been dismissed but was now being heard. The movement had forced society to confront its own complicity in the addiction crisis, and it had begun the long process of reform. But even with the passing of the act, you knew that the fight was far from over. While progress had been made, there was still much work to do. The epidemic was not over, and addiction continued to be a pervasive issue, affecting countless people across the world. The medical community had taken its first steps toward understanding addiction as a disease, but there were still many doctors, still many institutions, that continued to see addiction through the lens of moral failure rather than as the complex medical issue it truly was. For you, the women who had fought for reform were not just heroes, they were the embodiment of resilience, of women who refused to be silenced, who stood up for themselves, and for all the women who had been exploited by a system that had never understood their struggles. They had opened the door for future generations to have their voices heard, to speak openly about addiction, and to demand the treatment and support they deserved. The echoes of their resistance reverberated through history, inspiring future movements for women's rights, health reform, and the fight against addiction. And while the struggle was far from over, it had been irrevocably changed by the women who refused to stay silent. As the movement gained momentum, you feel a sense of empowerment that you had never known before. The future is uncertain, but one thing is clear. The women who fought for change have lit a path forward. You are no longer a silent victim of society's expectations. You are part of a larger movement, one that continues to push for progress, for reform, and for a future where women's health and voices are treated with the respect they deserve. And as you walk forward, you carry with you the lessons of the past, knowing that the fight for change never truly ends. In the dimly lit consultation rooms of Victorian England, women like you would often find themselves waiting, weary and anxious, for a brief respite from the relentless demands of their lives. You had come to trust the doctor, the one figure in society who seemed to have the knowledge and authority to heal. You might have entered that room carrying the weight of sleepless nights, the quiet sadness that often followed personal loss, or the subtle but persistent anxiety that gnawed at you from the inside. Perhaps you were simply exhausted from the constant cycle of domestic duties, the pressure of being a perfect wife and mother. Whatever the cause, the doctor's office seemed like the only place where relief might be found. You knew that the world expected so much of you. Society had little room for weakness, and you felt the burden of trying to meet its impossible standards. The doctor, with his calm and measured manner, listened as you described your symptoms. Maybe it was the restlessness that kept you awake at night, the nagging headache that wouldn't go away, or the pervasive sense of melancholy that lingered in your heart. You spoke of your distress, and he, in turn, reassured you that these feelings were not uncommon, especially among women. And so, with the gentleness of someone who had seen this many times before, he would offer a solution: a small bottle of laudanum, a soothing tincture of opium, promising you relief. "Take this, dear," he would say with a reassuring smile. "It will calm your nerves, help you sleep, and ease that pain you've been describing. It's quite safe, you see, and many women of your station take it for similar ailments." You, trusting in the medical profession and the knowledge of your physician, might have taken the bottle, believing that this medicine was a cure, a remedy carefully prescribed to help you function in a world that demanded so much. Perhaps, like many women, you had heard of laudanum before. It was widely accepted in society, seen as a harmless solution for emotional distress and physical discomfort. Women from all walks of life used it, from the wealthiest of the aristocracy to the most humble of housewives. It was an emblem of relief, a trusted ally in navigating the overwhelming pressures of life. The opium-based tincture, which was marketed as an effective cure for everything from anxiety to menstrual cramps, seemed like the perfect solution to your troubles. After all, if a doctor recommended it, it must be safe. And so you began to take it. At first, the effects were subtle, almost comforting. You felt the warmth spread through your body as the tension in your muscles slowly began to fade. Your mind, so often burdened with worry and fatigue, quieted. The oppressive weight of anxiety lifted for the first time in what felt like forever. You slept deeply and soundly, a welcome escape from the restlessness that had plagued you for so long. For a while, it worked, this small bottle of relief that had been handed to you with such simple confidence by a man in a white coat. It was easy to believe that everything was now under control. But the relief was short-lived. As the days passed, the effects began to wear off more quickly. You found that you needed a bit more of the tincture to feel the same sense of calm, the same relief. The bottle emptied faster than before, and soon you were turning to it more frequently. Perhaps you even felt guilty, as though you were asking for too much. But the relief it offered was undeniable. It was soothing, almost like a friend who promised to calm the storm inside. And so, you continued, what you didn't know, what no one had told you, was that this so-called remedy, prescribed by a trusted doctor, was not the simple, harmless solution it appeared to be. Laudanum, a tincture of opium, was, in fact, a drug that could quickly lead to dependency. The very substance that was supposed to ease your burdens was silently weaving itself into the fabric of your life. Becoming more than just a medicine, it was becoming a necessity. But you didn't know this. How could you? After all, the doctor had assured you it was safe, and society had endorsed it as the remedy for women's troubles. The addictive nature of opium was invisible to the medical community at the time, as was the long-term effect it had on the body and mind. You were not the only one, of course. Countless other women like you, had been prescribed the same tinctures, the same soothing medicines, under the same belief that they would provide relief. And for a time, they did. As you continued to take laudanum, you began to notice small changes. You couldn't quite put your finger on it, but there was a nagging feeling deep inside, a slight unease that clung to the edges of your thoughts. You couldn't shake the feeling that something was not quite right. Perhaps you felt more tired than usual, or maybe you noticed that your thoughts were becoming foggy, harder to focus. The calm you had once felt now seemed fleeting, and you found yourself needing more of the drug to feel the same sense of relief. Yet, you pushed these thoughts aside. After all, you had been prescribed this remedy by a doctor. What could be wrong with it? What you didn't realize was that this creeping dependency was happening to many women around you. The medical profession, despite its power and prestige, was blind to the dangers of the very substances it was prescribing. Opiates, including laudanum, were part of a widespread practice in which women's emotional and physical struggles were treated with powerful narcotics, with no understanding of the long-term consequences. The addictive properties of these substances were not widely recognized, and so the epidemic grew slowly, quietly, and almost invisibly. The medical establishment, which should have been the guardian of public health, failed to see the pattern of addiction that was forming. Doctors, many of whom were also consuming opiates for their own ailments or stress, were not immune to the allure of these drugs. The very men who prescribed opiates to their patients often turned to them for relief as well, normalizing their use and blinding themselves to the risks of addiction. In a society that believed so deeply in the authority of medicine, who would question the legitimacy of a prescription from a trusted doctor? Who would dare challenge the widespread use of opium-based remedies when they were marketed as safe and effective? For women, this lack of understanding from the medical community was devastating. The addiction that was slowly creeping into their lives was often invisible. Women, especially those from higher social classes, were often reluctant to admit they were struggling. Addiction was not something that could be spoken of openly, especially not in a world that expected them to maintain an image of composure and control. It was easier to turn inward, to suffer in silence, than to acknowledge the dependency that had taken root in their lives. And because addiction was not yet understood as a medical condition, but rather as a moral failing or personal weakness, it was often left untreated. Women continued to consume the drugs that had been prescribed to them, unaware that they were trapped in a cycle that would be difficult to escape. As you continued to rely on laudanum, the dependency deepened. The once soothing relief it provided now seemed like the only way to navigate the demands of your life. You may have even convinced yourself that it was the only thing keeping you going. The doctor, too, continued to offer the drug, believing it was helping, unaware that it was causing harm. Society, still blind to the addictive nature of opiates, carried on with the illusion that this was simply a remedy for the emotional frailty of women. But beneath the surface, the epidemic was growing, and the consequences were becoming more devastating with each passing day. You were not alone. The women around you, many of whom were also struggling with emotional and physical distress, had been prescribed the same remedies. Many, like you, had not been told about the risks of addiction. Many had not been warned that the very relief they were receiving would eventually become their prison. And so, the epidemic spread, an invisible epidemic, hidden behind the veil of medical authority and societal norms. The doctors who prescribed these drugs were not bad people, but they were blinded by their limited understanding of addiction. The women who took the drugs were not weak or morally flawed, but victims of a system that had failed to recognize their true struggles. Over time, the dependency that had started with a single prescription became a lifelong battle. Some women, like you, struggled quietly, enduring the physical and emotional toll of addiction in isolation. Others fought back, pushing for reform, for change, for the recognition that addiction was not a personal failing but a medical condition that required care, understanding, and treatment. The stories of these women, many of whom had suffered silently for years, would eventually give birth to movements that would challenge the medical establishment and push for the regulation of drugs like opium. But that fight would take time, and for many, the damage had already been done. As you reflect on your own experience, it becomes clear that the true tragedy of the opium epidemic was not just the physical addiction, but the silence that surrounded it. The invisible nature of addiction, the way it crept into the lives of so many, unnoticed and unacknowledged, made it all the more dangerous. The lack of understanding, the failure to recognize the true cost of addiction, allowed this silent epidemic to continue, unchecked, for far too long. And as you take a step back, you realize that the story of addiction is not just a story of personal suffering, but a story of a society that failed to see the hidden battles being fought every day. You find yourself in the heart of Victorian England, a world that spins with a unique blend of elegance and pressure. The streets are lined with grand homes, where women like you are expected to embody both the ideals of beauty and the unspoken burdens of domestic life. Your house is well kept, your children are properly dressed, and your husband returns to a home that exudes warmth and order. Yet, beneath the surface of this perfect facade, there is a quiet weariness that clings to you. The duties of the home, never ending and demanding, leave you exhausted, your energy always at its limits. The weight of maintaining an idealized version of family life is heavy, and there are few places to turn for respite. At first, you might not even realize how the pressure is beginning to affect you. Society has made it clear that women must be strong and composed, managing the household while maintaining an air of grace. Yet, the truth is, the constant strain of meeting these expectations, of never showing weakness, is taking its toll. The early mornings spent managing the children, the afternoons filled with cleaning, the evenings spent ensuring your husband has everything he needs, all of it feels like a never-ending cycle. And at night, when the day finally winds down, the exhaustion settles deep into your bone. To keep up with the demands, you turn to what the world around you assures you is the solution: products designed to enhance your beauty, your health, and your home. You've heard the advertisements in the magazines, on the walls of the pharmacy, and in the letters from friends. There is always a new product promising relief or a way to manage the endless demands of domestic life. These products, promoted as beauty enhancers, household cleansers, or health tonics, are touted as the very tools that can help you live up to the ideals of the time. They are not just products. They are presented as solutions to the challenges women face daily. Among these products, you notice something curious. Many of them contain ingredients that, though hidden behind scientific jargon or vague claims, are designed to stimulate caffeine, herbs, and, in some cases, even substances like cocaine or opium. These chemical substances are marketed as harmless, even beneficial, promising a boost of energy, a clearer mind, or a refreshing pick-me-up to get you through another round of chores. Perhaps the most common of these products are the tonics and beauty elixirs. Advertised as solutions to fatigue and stress, these tonics often contain caffeine or other stimulants designed to help you power through the long hours of housework. You start using these products regularly. They are so easy to believe, and their effects are immediate and satisfying. The tiny boost of energy you feel after a quick sip allows you to tackle the laundry, scrub the floors, and prepare meals with an efficiency you hadn't known before. Your mind, once clouded with the exhaustion of the day, feels sharper. You begin to rely on them, finding that the fatigue you once carried around can be easily dulled with just a few drops. It's not long before you notice that the fatigue is returning quicker than before. The tonic that once kept you awake through the night now seems to fade, its effects diminishing with each passing day. You take another dose, a little more than the last time. It gives you the energy to finish your chores, to care for your children, and to greet your husband with the warmth and grace that Victorian society demands of you. But each time, it feels like you need more. And soon, these products are no longer just a boost. They have become a part of your daily routine. You may tell yourself that you're simply keeping up with the demands of your role as a woman in Victorian society. Everyone uses these products. The advertisements promise no harm, and your friends swear by them. Perhaps you even feel a sense of pride in using these solutions. After all, these products have been crafted for women like you, women who are expected to be beautiful, energetic, and capable, all while managing a household and raising children. But you begin to notice a growing dependence. The tonic that helped you get through the day now seems to be necessary just to get out of bed in the morning. The faint headache that started as a slight annoyance after taking the tonic now lingers throughout the day. You take another dose, and the cycle begins again. Slowly, without realizing it, the stimulant has woven itself into the fabric of your life. You are no longer just using these products to enhance your energy, you are relying on them to function. And you are not alone. As you look around you, you begin to see that this quiet addiction is common among your friends and neighbors. The other women in your social circle, many of whom maintain the same impeccable homes and perfect appearances, also turn to these products. It has become normalized. It's part of the daily rhythm of life, just as necessary as preparing the morning tea or cleaning the floors. In the world of Victorian England, where appearances are everything, no one questions the products they use. They are endorsed by society, and in some ways, that makes them safer. But you, like many others, are slowly beginning to realize that the very products that were supposed to make your life easier have created a hidden dependency that is difficult to escape. Over time, this chemical dependency spreads through the daily routine of Victorian women like you. It becomes as much a part of your life as the rituals of morning and evening. These products, advertised as harmless and even beneficial, are ingrained in your daily habits, passed down from one generation to the next. What began as an attempt to meet society's expectations for energy, beauty, and domestic efficiency has now become an invisible chain, linking you to an addiction that no one is willing to acknowledge. Perhaps you begin to hear whispers. Other women in your social circles start to talk about the growing dependence they feel. At first, these conversations are hushed, spoken in quiet tones over tea, as though discussing such matters is shameful. But gradually, the reality of what's happening becomes clear. The women around you, just like you, are trapped in a cycle of dependence. The products that were supposed to make their lives easier have instead become a part of their daily survival, each dose subtly numbing them to the true costs of their dependency. It is not just the tonics and beauty elixirs, though. Household cleaning products, which were also marketed as part of the ideal Victorian home, contained ingredients that were equally as dangerous. Many of the cleaners used to scrub the floors, polish the furniture, and wash the windows contained substances that, while effective at their task, were toxic in nature. Over time, women would inhale these fumes daily, contributing to the slow poisoning of their bodies. Yet these substances, too, were normalized. The ideal Victorian woman not only kept her house spotless, but she also needed to do so with efficiency and speed. To accomplish this, she turned to the very chemicals that were now slowly undermining her health. These chemicals, designed to help you keep up with the impossible demands placed upon you, had become so ingrained in your routine that they were no longer questioned. Just as the social pressures to maintain a perfect home and family were ingrained in you, so too were the products you used to meet these standards. They had become tools of survival, tools that, over time, turned into crutches you could not function without. As you look around, you see that this pattern is not unique to you. Women everywhere, from the wealthiest to the most modest, have adopted this chemical dependency into their daily lives. It has become so normalized that it is almost invisible. The products are marketed as solutions to women's specific needs, beauty, health, and efficiency. But in reality, these solutions are leading women down a path of quiet addiction, and no one seems to recognize the danger. You begin to wonder how it all became so pervasive. How did society's expectations of women, with their constant need to perform, align so perfectly with the promotion of these products? And how did the medical community, which had once promised to help, become complicit in the normalization of these substances? The very institutions that were supposed to protect you were instead enabling your dependency, encouraging the belief that these chemicals were simply a necessary part of life. The story of domestic life and chemical dependency in Victorian England is not just the story of one woman's struggle. It is the story of countless women whose daily lives were shaped by the substances they used to meet society's expectations. And as the years pass, the weight of this dependency becomes clear. It is a weight that women carried quietly, for generations, often without realizing the toll it was taking. And yet, despite the harm it caused, these substances remain part of the fabric of life, passed down from one woman to the next, their true cost hidden behind the promise of beauty, efficiency, and domestic perfection. As you continue to reflect on your own journey, you realize the full impact of what has happened. The chemicals that once seemed to offer so much now feel like silent chains, and you begin to see the quiet struggle of women everywhere, women who, like you, were just trying to keep up with the expectations of society, only to find that the very products meant to help had, in the end, trapped them. You stand at the threshold of a Victorian world, one where every glance, every gesture, every word spoken is carefully observed, judged, and placed into the rigid framework of propriety. In the streets, you notice the bustling pace of life. Men in top hats, women in layered dresses, and tightly laced corsets, all moving to a rhythm dictated by invisible societal expectations. You are not immune to these pressures. As a woman, you are tasked with upholding a standard of femininity that demands calm, composure, and above all, control over your emotions. In a world that insists on silence in the face of distress, there is no room for tears or signs of weakness. You've spent countless hours in your home, attending to every detail with meticulous care. The house must be spotless, your children well behaved, and your husband's needs met without hesitation. To the outside world, everything appears perfect. But inside, you often feel like you are barely holding on. The weight of society's expectations is heavy, and there is no space for the fragility or the emotional turmoil you might feel. Society expects women to be serene, graceful, and selfless, performing their domestic duties with elegance and ease. But what happens when the pressure becomes too much? What happens when the unspoken fatigue starts to take its toll? You may have found yourself looking for a way to cope. After all, there's no room for emotional weakness in this world, especially not for women who must embody the ideal of feminine perfection. And that's where the miracle of pharmaceutical products comes in. The advertisements are everywhere, promising relief from the very burdens that weigh on you. The soothing tinctures, the comforting tonics, the delicate powders, each one promises to ease the tension, calm the nerves, and make the impossible demands of daily life bearable. You've seen the ads, read the claims in the magazines, and perhaps even heard your friends and family speak of these remedies in glowing terms. At first, it seems harmless enough. A few drops of laudanum here, a sip of a calming elixir there. The promises seem genuine. Relief from the stress that clings to you like a second skin. A sense of peace that allows you to smile and carry on with your day. The notion of calm and composed femininity is embedded in the very fabric of these products. They are not just medicines, they are part of a woman's toolkit for survival in a world that demands so much. These pharmaceutical products become more than just bottles of liquid. They are seen as symbols of control, of the ability to maintain a perfect exterior, while inside, you may feel like you're crumbling. As you use these products, you feel that calm wash over you. The anxiety that has plagued you fades into the background, and the tension in your body eases. You feel, for the first time in a long while, a sense of balance, of equilibrium. The promise of these products seems real. They allow you to meet the expectations of society, to perform your duties with the grace and composure that Victorian society demands. The relief they provide is almost immediate, and it makes the strain of daily life seem bearable. With each dose, the anxiety you once carried begins to dissolve, replaced by a peaceful numbness that allows you to get through the day. But as the days pass, something begins to change. The relief doesn't last as long as it once did. You find yourself reaching for the tincture more frequently, needing more of it to feel that same sense of calm. The dose that once seemed adequate is no longer enough. You're no longer just using these products to ease temporary discomfort, you're depending on them to function, to meet the demands of a world that will never allow you to show signs of weakness. The dependency grows slowly, almost imperceptibly, until one day you realize that you can't remember the last time you felt truly at ease without the aid of these substances. The irony is striking. Society, which demands that women maintain an air of calm and control, has created a situation where the very substances that promise relief from the stresses of life have become a source of addiction. The medical profession, in its eagerness to provide solutions, has unintentionally trapped women in a cycle of dependency. The very thing that was supposed to empower you, to help you live up to the ideal of femininity, has instead taken away your control. You are now dependent on the very products that society has normalized, and this dependency is seen not as a failure of the system, but as a reflection of your own need for composure. The societal expectations placed upon you are not unique. All around you, women are facing the same pressures, relying on the same pharmaceutical products to maintain the image of calm and control that Victorian society insists upon. The advertisements for these products are everywhere, carefully crafted to appeal to a woman's need to perform and maintain an air of grace. The clever marketing makes addiction seem like a necessity, a tool for navigating the delicate balance between personal well-being and societal expectation. The more you see these products advertised as essential for the well-being of women, the more you feel that they must be a part of your life too. After all, they promise to help you achieve the serenity and control that society expects from you. Pharmaceutical companies, ever the astute marketers, have tapped into this need, creating products that appear to fulfill the deepest desires of women: peace of mind, composure, and the ability to perform daily tasks with ease. The advertisements are careful to show women smiling, calm and composed, holding bottles of the very products that promise to give them the energy and poise needed to meet the demands of their world. In these advertisements, there is no sign of struggle, no mention of the hidden costs of dependency. The message is clear. These products are essential for maintaining a perfect life. As you continue to use these products, you begin to notice a subtle shift in your understanding. At first, it felt like a small indulgence, a way to ease the pressure, but now it has become a part of your routine, a routine that is shaped by the need to meet the expectations of society. You are not just using these products to feel better. You are using them to maintain the facade of composure and grace that society demands. Your emotional and physical well-being are now tied to the very substances that were supposed to help you. It's a strange and dangerous cycle. Society tells you that calm and composure are virtues, but it fails to acknowledge the toll that these demands take on your health. It's as though you're walking a tightrope, balancing the expectations of the world with your own need for relief. The pharmaceutical products, which were once seen as solutions, now serve as the very tools that allow you to keep up the appearance of control, even as the reliance on them deepens. In this world, you are not alone. Everywhere you look, women like you are using the same products to maintain the image of calm composure. You see them at social gatherings, in the streets, at family gatherings, always calm, always graceful, always composed. But beneath the surface, there is a shared experience, a quiet bond that ties women together in their hidden struggles. It is the shared reliance on these products that connects you, even though no one speaks about it openly. The addiction to these substances has become so normalized that it is no longer seen as an issue, it is simply part of life. The more you look around, the more you realize how deeply embedded these substances are in the daily life of Victorian women. They have become an accepted part of your routine, passed down from one generation to the next. Your mother, your grandmother, and perhaps even the women before them used these products to maintain the same calm composure that society expected. The cycle of dependency has been normalized, woven into the fabric of life. And though you long for a sense of peace and control, you find yourself trapped by the very substances that promise to give you those things. As the days turn into months, you begin to wonder how many other women are silently struggling in the same way. How many of them are just like you, caught in a web of dependency, trying to live up to a standard that society has set, using the very products that were supposed to help to keep it all together. It's a sobering thought, one that forces you to confront the harsh reality of Victorian life, where women's needs and struggles are often overlooked, and the products they are sold to meet those needs come with a heavy price. And so, you continue, walking the tightrope between societal expectation and personal dependence, caught in a cycle that, at times, feels impossible to break. The very products that were marketed to make your life easier have become the chains that bind you. And yet, as you look around, you see that this cycle is not unique to you. It is a silent epidemic, one that affects women across the nation and the world, in ways that are invisible, yet deeply felt. It is a story of resilience, yes, but also of exploitation of women who were sold a false promise of ease, and in the process became trapped by their own reliance on the very substances that promised to give them control. The legacy of this chemical dependency, passed from generation to generation, is a testament to the power of marketing, the power of societal expectations, and the power of pharmaceutical companies who capitalized on the struggles of women for their own profit. And as you navigate this world, it becomes clear. The true cost of the calm and composure society demands is far greater than anyone has realized. You stand at the edge of a glittering ballroom, where the sounds of laughter, the soft clinking of glasses, and the rustle of silk and velvet fill the air. The evening is warm, the scent of fresh flowers mingling with the perfume of the guests around you. Everywhere you look, there are women in elaborate gowns, their heads held high, their eyes sparkling with the kind of confidence that comes with wealth, status, and influence. These women are the epitome of Victorian high society, the ones who shaped the cultural, charitable, and political landscapes of the day. They move in circles that demand grace, composure, and an unwavering sense of control. They are expected to be paragons of virtue, upholding the moral fabric of society, hosting charity events, speaking on behalf of the less fortunate, and presenting a calm, composed image at all times. But as you step closer into the scene, something feels off, a subtle undercurrent beneath the surface of this polished world. The laughter, the music, the genteel conversation, everything appears to be in its proper place. Yet, as the night wears on, you begin to notice the slight tremor in some of the women's hands as they sip from their glasses, a slight pause before they speak, a look in their eyes that betrays something more than simple fatigue. The ever-present smiles seem a bit too practiced, a bit too perfect. It's as though behind the charm there is an unspoken truth lurking, a truth that these women, who appear to have it all, are struggling with something deeper, something that is rarely acknowledged in the bright lights of the ballroom. You find yourself drawn to a group of women seated at one of the grand tables, engaged in a conversation about the latest political developments. These women, influential figures in society, are among the most respected in the land. One of them is a well-known philanthropist, another a leader in the burgeoning women's rights movement. They discuss their charitable endeavors, their work to improve the lives of the poor, and their passionate speeches at social gatherings advocating for change. To the world, they are the very image of moral uprightness, the kind of women who inspire others to live with integrity and compassion. Yet, as the conversation continues, you notice something curious. One of the women, elegant in her demeanor and impeccably dressed, discreetly reaches into her bag and pulls out a small vial. She uncorks it carefully, then places a few drops of the tincture onto her wrist. The scent is faint but unmistakable laudanum, the very same opium-based tincture that many women had been using to cope with their own struggles. She does this as though it were a routine, a small indulgence in the middle of her busy evening, and the others at the table don't even bat an eye. It's almost as though they expect it, as though it's part of the social fabric that holds their world together. You are taken aback by the casualness of it all. Here are women who command respect, women who wield power and influence, openly using a substance that, in the lower classes, would have been viewed with suspicion and shame. It's almost as if the rules are different for them, like the pressures they face, the expectations placed upon them, are so immense that drug use becomes a necessary part of their public and private lives. As the night wears on, you see more of it, more vials, more discreet doses of laudanum, more moments of quiet relief in the midst of the high society performance. The juxtaposition is striking. On the one hand, these women are pillars of society, celebrated for their public roles and their charity work. On the other hand, they are partaking in a practice that, if known to the general public, would have shattered their carefully constructed images. The drug use in these elite circles was far from hidden. It was simply normalized, disguised as part of their demanding lives. What others might have seen as a dangerous addiction was, in their world, treated as a necessary means of coping with the weight of expectations. You begin to understand that for these women, the pressures of maintaining a perfect public image were so immense that anything that could help them keep up the facade, whether it was an opium tincture or a soothing dose of morphine, became an essential tool. It was not just the personal relief they sought, it was the means to function in a world that demanded constant perfection, poise, and control. You observe the way these women move through the crowd, each one playing her part with precision. They are so graceful, so poised, so effortlessly charming, yet beneath that polished exterior, there is something fragile. Their reliance on these substances is hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of their social lives. It is a dangerous secret, one that only a few know about, but which, in some ways, binds them together. These women are not just political and cultural leaders, they are also participants in a silent agreement, one that acknowledges the pressures of their world and the means they use to survive it. The drug use, masked as part of their public roles, is the lifeline they cling to in a society that demands too much from them. It's easy to see how this practice became ingrained in the elite social circles. The very foundations of Victorian high society were built on appearances. Public respectability was everything. For women, this meant conforming to an image of perfect calm, serenity, and control. They were expected to be pillars of virtue, not just in their charitable work, but in their personal lives as well. The weight of these expectations, always poised, always graceful, always in control, was immense. And it was in this environment that opium-based products became a silent ally. The laudanum, the tinctures, the powders, all of them offered a way to cope with the constant strain of maintaining the flawless image society demanded. You realize, as you look at these women, that the very addiction that would have been seen as shameful in the common public was, in their world, not only accepted but almost expected. Their dependency on opiates was not a moral failing but a necessity, a part of their performance in the larger social drama. In their circles, drug use was not stigmatized. It was hidden behind a veil of respectability. When these women used substances to calm their nerves, to energize themselves for another event, or to keep up with the endless round of social obligations, it was not seen as a weakness, it was seen as a practical solution. After all, how could anyone possibly meet the expectations of Victorian high society without some form of relief? But there was an unspoken cost to this lifestyle, and you begin to see the cracks beneath the facade. The very dependence that allowed these women to maintain their public composure slowly began to erode their private lives. The need for these substances grew, and with it, the toll they took on their health. These women, celebrated for their work in charity and politics, were often silently suffering from the very thing they were trying to escape, the unyielding pressure of their public roles. And yet, they continued, using their drugs as a shield against the strain of it all, as a means of survival in a world that would never allow them to show vulnerability. As you watch them, you understand that their drug use wasn't simply about seeking relief, it was about survival. The social expectations placed on them were so extreme that, without these substances, they may not have been able to maintain their place in society. The drugs, initially taken as a way to ease their minds and bodies, had become woven into the very fabric of their existence. They were no longer just women. They were performers in a high-stakes drama, playing their parts for the world to see, and the drugs were the unspoken tool that allowed them to stay in character. The contradiction is hard to ignore. These women, who held so much influence in society, had become slaves to the very substances that were supposed to help them. Their private addiction was veiled by the public respectability of their positions. The more you watch, the clearer it becomes that this issue, this dependency, was not limited to the lower classes, to the women who had no choice but to suffer in silence. It was an issue that reached the highest echelons of society, where the demand for perfection and composure was perhaps the greatest of all. In this world, addiction was not something to be ashamed of. It was something that was quietly accepted, hidden behind the mask of respectability. The juxtaposition of public virtue and private addiction became one of the most complex issues facing Victorian society. While the drug use was normalized among the elite, it carried with it a deep irony, one that would not be fully realized until much later. These women, trapped in a cycle of dependency, were living proof of the dangers of a society that demanded perfection and composure at all costs. And as you step back from the scene, you realize that this hidden dependency, this silent epidemic, was not just a problem faced by a few. It was a reflection of the larger societal issues at play, where women were expected to maintain their roles without showing the emotional cost. Their addiction was not just a personal struggle, it was a symptom of a broader societal flaw, a flaw that would take many years to confront. Yet, as you watch these women continue their performances, you can't help but wonder how many others, just like them, are silently suffering in a world that demands so much but offers so little in return. You stand at the edge of the bustling streets of Victorian London, the heart of a world brimming with change and opportunity. The city is growing, expanding into a thriving metropolis, and with it comes a new era of innovation. There is a palpable energy in the air, the kind that whispers of progress, of a future filled with discoveries and groundbreaking solutions. The Industrial Revolution has left its mark on every corner of society, and among the greatest transformations is the rise of the pharmaceutical industry, a force that is quickly becoming one of the most powerful players in this changing world. As you walk through the cobblestone streets, you begin to notice something that wasn't there before. Advertisements plastered on every available surface. They are on the sides of carriages, on the walls of pharmacies, in the pages of newspapers. Everywhere you look, you see them. The words catch your eye with their bold promises: cure for fatigue, relief from sleeplessness, the ultimate remedy for women's health. The pharmaceutical companies, which had once been small, quiet businesses, are now growing in influence, and they are eager to spread their message to every corner of society. You are no stranger to the pressures of daily life, particularly the unspoken burden that weighs on women like you. Society expects you to embody grace, strength, and composure, to fulfill the demanding role of wife and mother, and to do so without ever revealing the emotional or physical exhaustion that comes with it. The pressures are unrelenting. At times, it feels as if your very existence is defined by what you can accomplish, how well you can maintain the delicate balance between your family's needs and the expectations of society. And then, there it is, an ad that seems to speak directly to you. The words promise relief, a simple solution to the weariness that has started to cling to your every movement. The advertisement promises that this new product will give you the energy you need, calm your nerves, and restore your vitality. It sounds too good to be true, but in a world where exhaustion is a constant companion, it feels like a lifeline. You've heard whispers of such remedies before, but now they seem to be everywhere, promising solutions to ailments you've only recently begun to name: fatigue, insomnia, nervousness, and the deep weariness that lingers long after the day has ended. Pharmaceutical companies have quickly learned to market their products directly to women, tapping into an area they know is of great concern: women's health. The advertisements paint a picture of fragile, emotional creatures who are constantly battling physical and mental exhaustion, unable to keep up with the demands placed on them. The tone is comforting, reassuring, almost maternal, promising that these products will offer the relief you deserve. Women, after all, were seen as more susceptible to emotional and physical distress. It's easy to believe that a product designed specifically for your needs would be the answer to your troubles. At first, these products appear to be harmless, even beneficial. You may have started with a bottle of soothing tonic, marketed as a remedy for nervous conditions or female exhaustion. Perhaps you were given a prescription for a calming tincture, just a few drops a day to ease your worries and help you get through the day. The promise is always the same: these products will relieve the pressure, soothe your nerves, and make the unrelenting demands of your life more manageable. And, for a while, they do. The first time you take the tincture or sip the tonic, you feel a sense of calm wash over you. The tension that had been building in your shoulders for days, perhaps weeks, begins to fade. Your mind quiets, and for the first time in what feels like forever, you can breathe a little easier. But what you don't realize, what no one tells you, is that these products come with an insidious cost. The pharmaceutical companies that are making their fortunes off of your needs are not concerned with the long-term consequences. They are interested in one thing: making their products seem indispensable, necessary for your well-being. And so, they continue to market these products as the answer to your problems without ever acknowledging the risks. You, like many women, begin to rely on them more and more, taking them daily without thinking twice. You start to feel better, but only temporarily. Soon, the relief you once felt begins to fade quickly, and you find yourself reaching for the bottle more often. What was once a remedy becomes a necessity, and the cycle continues. As you continue to use these products, you begin to notice something else, something that no one around you seems willing to talk about. The dependency starts to grow, slow and quiet, until one day, you realize that you can't remember the last time you felt truly calm without the aid of these substances. It's not just the tonics, either. There are beauty elixirs, powders, and perfumes all sold with the same promise: to make women feel better, look better, and be more composed. These products are not just sold, they are endorsed by society. Everywhere you look, they are presented as the tools that women need to succeed, to meet the demands placed upon them, and to maintain the flawless image of femininity that Victorian society so prizes. As you walk through the streets, the advertisements seem to multiply. They are in every window, on every street corner, and in every magazine. Pharmaceutical companies have learned to sell not just a product, but an image, a promise of relief and perfection. The products have become ubiquitous, and slowly, they have become accepted as part of daily life. Women, once hesitant to speak about their struggles, now find themselves reaching for these remedies, believing that they are part of the solution, that they are a natural and necessary response to the demands of life. The societal pressure to maintain composure and grace has created an environment where addiction, though hidden, has been normalized. It is no longer something to be ashamed of. It is simply part of what it means to be a woman in Victorian England. Pharmaceutical companies, ever clever in their marketing strategies, have convinced society that addiction is not a consequence, it is a necessity. To be a woman in this world means relying on these products to meet the ever-growing expectations of beauty, efficiency, and composure. Addiction, once seen as a moral failing, has become something else entirely, a tool for survival in a world that demands too much. You begin to understand that the growing influence of the pharmaceutical industry has done something far more dangerous than simply sell products. It has reshaped society's understanding of health and well-being. The dependency on these substances is now woven into the very fabric of women's lives. It has been disguised as self-care, as a means of coping with the impossible expectations placed on women. The products are no longer just medicine. They are a part of the ritual of femininity, something every woman must have to meet the demands of the day. And yet, as you look around, you wonder, how many women are caught in this web? How many women, like you, are unknowingly becoming dependent on the very products that were supposed to help? The more you think about it, the more you realize that this dependency is not just an individual issue, it is a societal one. The pharmaceutical companies have capitalized on women's struggles, marketing products that promise relief but come with a cost. And the cost is not just physical, it is psychological, emotional, and societal. In a world that prizes composure, beauty, and grace above all else, addiction has been normalized. It's a quiet epidemic, one that society refuses to acknowledge because it is disguised as something that women need, something that is simply part of the landscape of their lives. The more you think about it, the more it becomes clear. The pharmaceutical industry, once a small player in the world of medicine, has now become a force of unimaginable power, shaping not just the health of individuals, but the very fabric of society. The promise of relief, the promise of calm, has been sold to women for generations, and in doing so, the industry has normalized something far more dangerous: addiction. As you continue your journey through this world, you can't help but wonder what the future holds. The pharmaceutical companies, with their immense power, will continue to grow, their influence spreading further into the daily lives of women. The addiction that was once hidden behind closed doors is now in plain sight, woven into the very structure of society. The question is no longer whether this will have consequences, it's what those consequences will be. And as you walk through the streets of Victorian England, you realize that this is only the beginning. As you wander through the cobbled streets of Victorian London, you feel the pulse of the city around you, its rhythm driven by a mixture of grandeur and secrecy. The air is thick with the scent of soot from the factories, the distant hum of social gatherings, and, perhaps most of all, the whispers of a hidden world, a world that, until now, you had been unaware of. It's a world filled with the desperate faces of women just like you. Women who have been silently caught in the grip of a dependency that no one dares to speak of. The doors to this world are not marked, and the faces within it are obscured by shadows. But if you look closely enough, you begin to see the outlines of what has been happening right beneath the surface of society's awareness. At first, it was the doctors who had led you into the quiet path of reliance, prescribing opium tinctures and laudanum for every emotional and physical ailment, reassuring you that they were simply helping. You trusted them, believing that the solutions they provided were just that, solutions. But as time went on, something shifted inside you. The tinctures that once provided instant relief no longer worked in the same way. The numbness you had once felt, the relief from the chaos of your life, began to fade more quickly. It wasn't long before you needed more. What was once a simple remedy had evolved into something else, something you couldn't escape. And now, you find yourself in the midst of something far darker than you could have imagined. An underground network that thrives on the very addiction it has helped to fuel. You didn't know it at first. How could you have? At first, the regular doses from your doctor seemed enough. But as the days passed, the need for more, for something stronger, began to take root. The once comforting relief turned into a hunger that your doctor could no longer satisfy, not because he didn't want to, but because there were limits to what he could provide. The law, too, had begun to tighten, regulating what could be dispensed, restricting the availability of these substances that had once been so freely handed out. But addiction doesn't heed laws or regulations. It's like a quiet, insidious beast creeping into every corner of your life, demanding more with each passing day. And as the regular channels for opium and other opiates became more controlled, a darker, hidden side of the market began to flourish. At first, you hear the rumors, whispers in the back rooms of high society gatherings, hushed conversations between women who had once been your peers, who now seem to have grown more desperate, their faces more hollow. You overhear a conversation in a well-dressed parlor where a woman, who had once been elegant and poised, speaks of new sources, places where she could find what she needed. These words sound almost foreign, their meaning vague and elusive, but they are enough to catch your attention. A hidden world is being built, one that caters specifically to those like you women whose dependence has outgrown what the law allows. These whispered rumors gradually shape into something more tangible. There are people, shadowy figures, who make their living off of the very thing that has ensnared you. And it isn't long before you are introduced to them. The first time you meet them, it's in an alley, dimly lit, tucked away from the main roads where society's eyes cannot reach. There's a sense of dread in the air, a whisper of something illicit, yet a strange sense of excitement rises within you. You had grown tired of waiting, tired of being told that the relief you needed could no longer be given, tired of being pushed back into a world of abstinence. Here, in this hidden corner of the city, the doors to a new world are opening. Inside, the place is nothing like the elegant drawing rooms or the gleaming pharmacies you had once known. The dimly lit space is filled with men and women whose faces are clouded by the same desperation you feel. The products here are more potent than anything you've ever encountered. It's not the mild tinctures you once took, not the little bottle of laudanum that was once prescribed to you so casually. This is something different, something stronger, and something that promises to feed the hunger you've been struggling with. You're told that the pain, the craving, can be soothed, that the relief you're seeking is here, hidden in plain sight, away from the watchful eyes of society. The dealers don't look like what you would expect. They're not the shady figures from the novels or the dark alleys you've read about. Instead, they're women who were once like you, who once sat in parlors, attended soirees, and lived the life of the upper class. But now, they are part of a secret system, one that thrives on feeding the addiction of women like you, women whose tolerance has surpassed the limits of what the legal market can provide. At first, the rush is undeniable. You feel the powerful effects of the substance. The numbness, the calm, the warmth that spreads through you, it's everything you've been craving, everything that has been missing from your life. There is no judgment here, no moral condemnation, only a promise of relief and a steady supply of what you need to keep going. You don't even think about the cost. At that moment, the price doesn't matter. You've crossed a threshold, and once you've crossed it, there's no going back. This underground market, once small and discreet, grows quickly. Word spreads through the whispers of women who are desperate for the same thing, something stronger, something that promises the relief they can no longer find in the legal channels. These black market networks become more organized, and more women like you begin to rely on them. What had once been a quiet individual addiction becomes a shared, secret culture. A culture of dependency that thrives in the shadows, hidden from the scrutiny of the law. As the demand for these illicit products grows, so too does the market. What began with the occasional bottle of stronger tinctures expands to a network of sellers, some of whom are former medical professionals, others simply opportunists, who have seized upon the growing need for these substances. And they are not just selling to the poor or the desperate. They are selling to the women who had once been society's elite, those who were expected to maintain an image of composure and grace, but who now find themselves, just like everyone else, trapped in the grip of addiction. These underground markets bypass the regulations that were put in place to protect the public, skirting the law with clever tactics and hidden exchanges. And with every transaction, the culture of addiction becomes more entrenched. What had once been a taboo has now become a hidden, accepted part of high society. You are not alone in this secret world. There are women just like you, wealthy, influential, seemingly composed, who are also here, seeking the same relief. The addiction is no longer confined to the shadows of society. It has infiltrated every corner of it. Hidden behind the facade of respectability, you begin to see the true extent of this hidden culture. It is not just about getting your fix. It's about survival in a world that demands too much. A world that has made addiction not just a possibility, but a necessity. These black market networks are feeding off the very pressures that have shaped your life and the lives of women around you. They know what you need. They understand the unspoken expectations placed upon you, and they offer you the means to meet them. The addiction becomes a currency, one that allows you to keep up the appearance of the calm, composed woman that society demands. But even as you indulge in the relief, you can't shake the growing sense of unease. This is not the world you thought you were living in. This is not the life you imagined when you were first introduced to laudanum as a remedy for your stress. What was once a simple solution, a few drops here and there to get you through the day, has turned into something darker, something that now controls you. The addiction is no longer invisible. It is a part of the very fabric of your existence. You feel a weight in your chest, a weight that grows heavier each time you return to the underground markets, each time you rely on the substances that have come to define your life. The dependence has spread, unchecked and unregulated. And now, it feels as though there is no way out. The dealers, once distant figures, have become a part of your routine. You begin to wonder how many others are caught in the same web. How many women have become just like you, silently battling the addiction that has crept into their lives, all while maintaining the facade of respectability. And so, you continue, moving through a world where addiction is both hidden and normalized. You've crossed a line, and once that line is crossed, it feels impossible to turn back. The drugs, the dealers, the hidden networks, they are now part of your world, part of the life you lead. And as the days go on, you begin to realize just how deep this hidden culture of addiction runs, how far-reaching its effects are, and how impossible it is to escape once you've become part of it. The pharmaceutical exploitation has found its way into every corner of society, and now it's become a part of yours too. The scent of ink fills the air as you sit at a dimly lit table in a quiet parlor, the flicker of candlelight dancing across the pages of a well-worn medical journal. It's late into the evening, and you find yourself alone with your thoughts, flicking through the pages of these journals that have become both a source of knowledge and, now, a quiet source of unease. The words before you are written in the precise, controlled manner of professionals, each paragraph dripping with the weight of authority. The articles are filled with promises of relief for the ailments that women like you suffer from: nervous disorders, emotional distress, fatigue, and the seemingly endless pressures of daily life. The very remedies that have been prescribed to you, the tinctures and elixirs, are touted as solutions, offered with a confidence that seems unshakable. As you read through the articles, you are struck by the constant refrain: opiates, especially laudanum, are the answer to your problems. The medical profession, those who have sworn an oath to heal, seem to be united in their belief that these remedies are the key to managing the anxiety, the restlessness, the sadness that seem to run so deeply within you. The more you read, the more certain you become that the prescription you've been following is not just something your doctor recommended. It's something that the medical community has embraced as a universal solution. These articles, each one filled with data, clinical observations, and even case studies, present opiates as a time-tested cure, a medication that can alleviate everything from nervousness to sleeplessness with ease. Yet as you turn the pages, something is missing. The very word that should be at the forefront of these discussions, addiction, is barely mentioned. The term seems to float at the edges of these discussions but is never addressed directly. You read about the benefits of opium-based remedies in soothing the mind, easing anxiety, and bringing comfort to those in distress. And yet, not once do you come across an acknowledgement of the potential for dependency. It's as though addiction, if it's even considered, is a distant problem, one that doesn't concern the medical community or those in the higher echelons of society. The journals, with all their authority and scientific precision, simply do not acknowledge the dangers lurking behind the very remedies they champion. You begin to realize that the medicine you've been relying on, the substance that has so often soothed you when life's pressures feel unbearable, is being endorsed across a broad spectrum of medical journals. You feel a quiet sense of unease stir within you. These publications, printed in the most esteemed medical institutions, seem to assure their readers, physicians, patients, society that opiates are safe, reliable, and even essential for women's health. What was once a small dose to help ease your nerves has, over time, become a larger part of your life. You're no longer just using the medicine when you need it. You rely on it to function. But as you sit back in your chair, the light from the candle casting shadows across the pages of the journal, you wonder, how is it that the medical community can so blithely overlook the potential dangers of these remedies? How could something so widely prescribed, so endorsed by the very authorities who are supposed to understand and protect your well-being, be so blind to the possibility of addiction? And it becomes clearer with each passing thought. There is something deeply ingrained in the very fabric of Victorian medical practice that makes it difficult, if not impossible, to question the efficacy and safety of these substances. As you continue to read through the journal, it becomes apparent that the concept of addiction is either downplayed or ignored entirely. Medical professionals, those who are meant to be the voice of reason, the defenders of public health, seem more focused on presenting opiates as a panacea for women's ailments than on examining the risks of long-term use. The articles are filled with assurances that these medicines, while potent, are effective and safe when used appropriately. Yet, in their desire to be seen as infallible experts, they are blind to the growing culture of dependency that these very remedies are creating. It's as if the risks of addiction are too subtle to be noticed, or perhaps too inconvenient to acknowledge. The more you read, the more you feel the creeping sense of something being hidden. These journals, so influential, have become an echo chamber, a place where addiction is marginalized, swept aside, or simply ignored. The medical community, rather than being the watchdog for society's health, has become complicit in perpetuating the widespread use of opiates. They have built an industry around these substances, one that thrives on the promise of relief for women's supposed ailments. But what is the cost of that relief? The answer lies in the growing culture of addiction that is slowly infiltrating the lives of women across the country, a culture that is encouraged, in part, by the very doctors who should be looking out for your well-being. The growing reliance on these substances becomes a silent epidemic, one that grows with every prescription written, with every case study that glorifies the benefits of opiates without addressing the risks. The journals do not mention the women who, after using these substances for months or years, find themselves unable to function without them. They do not speak of the toll addiction takes on the body, on the mind, on families. Instead, they continue to promote opiates as a harmless solution to what were, at first, merely common complaints: nervousness, fatigue, sadness. As the articles go on, you begin to see how the medical profession's narrow focus on circular diagnoses has helped perpetuate the problem. A nervous condition here, a female hysteria, they're diagnoses that could be applied to any number of symptoms, often based on little more than a woman's emotional state or her perceived fragility. These vague, often unsubstantiated diagnoses served as the perfect justification for the prescription of opiates. Women who came to their doctors with complaints about their emotional or physical well-being were given prescriptions for opiates, treated as if their suffering was merely the result of their weakness or fragility. There was no attempt to understand the deeper causes of their distress, no recognition that many of these women were simply struggling under the weight of societal pressures, personal loss, or the unrelenting demands of their roles as wives and mothers. Instead, they were given a drug to calm their nerves, to dull the discomfort that came with being a woman in a world that offered no space for vulnerability. As you read on, you begin to see the pattern emerge. The medical journals, rather than challenging the growing dependency on these substances, reinforce it. The narrative they present is one that focuses on quick relief, on the idea that women need only the right prescription to return to their proper place in society. They speak of treatment as a means of restoring order and composure to the fragile female form, without ever acknowledging that the very treatments they advocate for are often the root of the problem. Addiction, in their view, is not a possibility, it is an abstract concept, a far-off consequence that they prefer not to confront. Instead, they continue to champion their miracle cures, oblivious to the growing storm they are feeding. And so, the cycle continues. Women who use these products, who are prescribed these substances to ease their pain or their emotional distress, become trapped in a web of dependency. The very remedies that were meant to help them are the ones that bind them. The medical journals, which should have been the voice of caution, have become part of the culture that enables this addiction. Their silence, their refusal to recognize the consequences of widespread drug use, only fuels the epidemic, making it more difficult for those who are suffering to find the help they need. You begin to feel the weight of it all, the realization that the medical community, the very institution that should have protected you, has instead turned a blind eye to the harm it has caused. You wonder how many others are trapped in this same cycle. How many women have been given the same prescription, the same assurances that these drugs are safe, only to find themselves ensnared by an addiction they never saw coming. The quiet epidemic grows, fed by the medical journals, the circular diagnoses, and the endless prescriptions. It's a system that thrives on its own ignorance, a system that refuses to acknowledge the consequences of its actions. As you close the journal in your hands, a sense of quiet anger rises within you. You have seen the truth, the medical profession's complicity in perpetuating this epidemic, the way addiction has been normalized and ignored. The culture of addiction, once hidden, is now in plain sight, its roots deeply embedded in the very system that was meant to protect you. The question now is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you remain silent, as so many women have before you? Or will you join the growing chorus of voices demanding change, demanding recognition of the damage that has been done? The choice is yours, but one thing is clear. The system is broken, and it is time for the truth to be told. The late afternoon light filters softly through the grand windows of a Victorian townhouse, casting long shadows across the plush velvet upholstery and the polished wooden floors. The room is filled with the sound of polite conversation, the clink of delicate china cups, and the quiet rustle of expensive fabrics. You've been invited to one of the most coveted gatherings in the city, a social club where the upper echelons of Victorian society meet to exchange ideas, drink tea, and, as you've soon learned, partake in a much quieter, much more secretive practice. As you step inside, the aroma of freshly brewed tea mingles with the faint, almost imperceptible scent of something else, a calming, almost heady fragrance. It is laudanum, it is opium, masked as part of the delicate ritual of social life. The women you see around you, well-dressed, poised, and elegant, are not just sipping tea. They are partaking in something far more potent, something that helps them maintain the composure required by society's exacting standards. In the midst of polite conversations and the exchange of the latest gossip, there is a quiet undercurrent, the steady presence of opium-based tinctures being passed around among the guests. To the untrained eye, it might look like nothing more than another part of the tea party, another moment of relaxation and moral behavior. After all, no one would dare suggest that a respectable lady would engage in anything improper. And yet, beneath the surface of these seemingly innocent gatherings, there is a growing trend that is sweeping through the circles of society. Opium, once seen as a dangerous indulgence for the lower classes, is now becoming a normalized part of the social scene, especially among women. You notice it in the way the women sip from their small glasses, their movements slow and deliberate, the subtle gleam in their eyes, the way they smile a little more dreamily than usual. It all becomes clear. This is no ordinary social gathering. In fact, the use of opium is so deeply embedded in the fabric of these high society events that it is practically unremarkable. The hosts offer the tincture as casually as they offer tea, as if it's just another aspect of the refined atmosphere they have cultivated. There is no shame in it, no hesitancy, just quiet acceptance, as though opium is simply another luxury, like the silk tablecloth or the delicate pastries being passed around. You take a seat, feeling a bit out of place at first. The women around you are in their element, floating through the gathering with the kind of confidence and ease that only the wealthy and well-connected can afford. And then you notice how they talk, how each woman, with perfect composure, discusses matters of the world, politics, fashion, literature, and social affairs. But there's something more, something that lies beneath the surface of these conversations, hidden in the way they speak, in the languid movements of their bodies. There's a quiet heaviness in the air, a sense that they are not just exchanging pleasantries. They are partaking in something that has become as natural to them as drinking their tea. A well-dressed woman seated beside you leans in, her eyes gleaming with a soft, almost dreamy look. She offers you a small vial with a gentle smile, as if the act of sharing this particular indulgence is just as much a part of the social ritual as the conversation itself. A little tonic, she says, her voice low, to calm the nerves. You simply must try it. It makes everything so much more delightful. She doesn't need to explain further. You understand immediately. This isn't just tea, it's a social experience wrapped in the warm embrace of a tincture that promises to ease the mind and soul. At first, you hesitate. This is not a habit you are accustomed to, and you can't help but feel a slight ripple of discomfort. But you also feel the weight of the gathering press upon you, the subtle but unmistakable pressure to blend in, to partake in the same shared experience. The women here do it, after all, without a second thought. To refuse would be a subtle rebellion, a rejection of the very fabric of the society you are now a part of. You take the vial and hold it in your hand, its cool glass smooth against your skin. With a deep breath, you open it and take a careful sip. The effect is immediate. A warmth spreads through your chest, followed by a calm, gentle wave that seems to ease the tension you hadn't even realized you were holding. The world softens around you, the conversations become more fluid, the faces more serene. The sense of heaviness you had carried with you all day begins to melt away. You are aware of the irony that settles within you. You have just consumed a substance that, only a few months ago, you would have never imagined partaking in. And yet, in this world, it feels entirely natural. Here, in this social gathering, opium has become a part of the elegance, the calm composure that Victorian society demands from its women. As the evening stretches on, the conversation flows as freely as the wine. But there is something else happening. Women around you, once rigid in their demeanor, now seem relaxed, almost ethereal. They speak more slowly, their words rolling off their tongues with ease, their faces flushed with the contentment that comes from the tincture they've consumed. This is no longer just a gathering. It is a delicate dance, a carefully crafted performance where opium, once vilified, now seems to play a central role in the maintenance of social decorum. The very thing that would have been considered a vice in another setting has been transformed into a tool for grace and composure. The deeper you sink into the atmosphere, the more you realize the subtle power of this new social norm. This is no longer something that is hidden or whispered about behind closed doors. It has been fully integrated into the social fabric of elite Victorian society. Women, like you, are turning to opium to help them navigate the delicate balance of public and private life. The social pressure to maintain a calm, graceful facade is immense, and opium has become the unspoken ally in this delicate performance. It is not a shameful secret. It is now a celebrated part of the experience. The more you watch, the more you realize how this practice has evolved into something entirely normalized within these circles. It is as if the act of using opium has become synonymous with sophistication, with the ability to navigate the complex demands of high society. These women have learned to wear their composure like a cloak, using opiates as a tool to keep their emotions in check and maintain their dignity in a world that expects them to be perfect. No one here seems to see it as a problem. In fact, the more you observe, the more you realize that refusing the tincture would be an act of rebellion, a refusal to conform to the delicate expectations of this world. And yet, as the night wears on, you can't help but feel a quiet unease settle in your chest. This is the world you have stepped into, the world where opium is no longer a forbidden indulgence, but a normal part of life, an essential tool for maintaining the perfect image of Victorian femininity. It feels almost too easy, too comfortable, as though the substance has been woven into the very fabric of these women's lives, allowing them to float through their roles with an ease that is both enviable and troubling. You can't shake the nagging thought that somewhere beneath the surface of these elegant, serene faces, there is a quiet dependency, one that, over time, could spiral into something far darker. As the evening comes to a close, you leave the social club feeling a strange mix of serenity and discomfort. The city outside feels different now, as though you have just stepped out of one world and into another. The opium tincture has worked its magic, leaving you calm and content. But there is a part of you that knows something is wrong. The very substance that promised to bring you peace has now embedded itself in the heart of your social life, and the lines between relaxation and dependency have blurred in ways you can't yet fully understand. You've participated in this world, and you can't help but wonder if, at some point, it will consume you just as it has consumed so many before you. And as you walk away from the club, the streets of London stretch out before you, teeming with the energy of a city that is growing, changing, and hiding secrets beneath its bustling exterior. You realize, with a sinking feeling, that the use of opium in Victorian social circles has done more than just normalize the substance. It has embedded it so deeply into the social fabric that its use will be difficult, if not impossible, to unravel. For now, it remains a part of this world, a hidden ally in the delicate dance of Victorian life, quietly slipping into the hands of women who must maintain their composure at all costs. You step into the bustling factory floor, the clang of metal on metal, the hum of machinery, and the rhythmic tap of footsteps all around you. The air is thick with the sounds of industry, the noise a constant companion to the workers who, like you, toil through the long hours. The factory is a world of movement and repetition, each day stretching on as you and your fellow workers perform the same tasks again and again. The pace is relentless, the expectations high, and all the while the clock ticks steadily, marking the hours that seem to bleed into one another without mercy. Your hands are tired, raw from the constant work. Your body aches, the muscles stiff from standing for hours at a time. But it's the exhaustion that weighs the heaviest on you, the bone-deep fatigue that lingers, never fully lifting. The work is demanding, and the hours are long. There's little time for rest, and the pressure to perform, to meet quotas, to be productive, is immense. But it's not just the physical toll that gets to you. It's the mental strain, the constant anxiety that comes from knowing that every moment you spend resting is a moment you're falling behind. The pressure to keep up, to stay alert, to be always efficient is crushing. But then, something changes. A shift in the air. A new announcement from the factory's overseers. It's subtle at first, whispered between workers, and it doesn't take long for the word to spread. Pharmaceutical products, designed to keep workers like you going, are now being distributed. They promise relief, a way to stay sharp, to push through the exhaustion, to meet the impossible demands of your job. The company, eager to keep productivity high and profits higher, has decided that you and your fellow female workers need this boost. It's a solution, they say, to help you handle the demands of the factory and make sure you're always at your best. You don't think twice when you first hear it. After all, these aren't just any products. They're endorsed by the factory. They're meant to help you, to give you the energy and focus you need to keep up with the work. The products they offer are simple: tonics, pills, and tinctures. Often opium-based remedies marketed as quick fixes for exhaustion, stress, and the toll that long working hours take on your body. A small dose in the morning, they say, will help you get through the day. A bit of laudanum, and you'll feel more energized, more focused, more able to meet the demands of the job. And so, like many others, you begin to use it. At first, it seems like a godsend. The fatigue that had once been your constant companion begins to fade, replaced by a surge of energy. Your mind sharpens. Your movements become quicker, more precise. You feel better than you have in weeks. The work, once overwhelming, now feels manageable. Even dare you say it easy. You're able to keep up, to push forward, to perform at a level you didn't think was possible. And it isn't just you. Around you, the factory floor seems to hum with newfound energy. The other women, your fellow workers, are taking the same products, and they too feel the difference. The once staggering hours seem to pass more quickly. You notice that the women who had once struggled to keep up are now moving with ease, their eyes bright, their faces more alert. The factory, once a place of endless labor and exhaustion, now feels like a place of potential. The products, presented as tools for productivity, have become the lifeline that keeps everyone moving forward. But as time passes, something begins to shift. The effects of the products, which once felt like a miracle, begin to fade more quickly. What once kept you sharp now seems to require more frequent doses, more pills, more tonics. The relief is not as immediate, not as satisfying, and yet you take them because you have to. You need them to keep up with the work. You need them to perform. You need them because the pressure is so overwhelming, and the alternative is unthinkable. Falling behind, being reprimanded, losing your job. You've seen what happens to women who can't keep up, how they're pushed aside, replaced by someone younger, someone more capable of handling the strain. The fear of losing your place in this unforgiving world drives you to take more, to rely on the very substance that once gave you relief, now fueling a cycle of dependency that grows stronger with each passing day. The more you think about it, the more you realize how much these products have become a part of your daily life. They are no longer just a remedy for exhaustion. They have become a necessity. The idea that you could function without them, that you could meet the demands of the factory without them, feels almost impossible. And so, you continue. You take the tinctures, the pills, the tonics. They have become tools. Tools that are not just offered, they are expected. They are seen as a natural part of the factory's rhythm, woven into the very structure of the workday. There's no shame in using them. In fact, there's an unspoken understanding that without them, you wouldn't be able to keep up. The factory itself has encouraged this reliance, endorsing the use of these substances as a way to enhance productivity and ensure that women like you can meet the high demands of the job. As the days pass, the dependency grows. You feel it in your body, in the way you now crave the substance just to get through the day. It's no longer just a boost, it's a need, and it's not just you. The women around you, your colleagues, your friends, are all caught in the same cycle. The factory, though it may be providing the product, is not concerned with the long-term consequences. It doesn't care that the substances are slowly taking hold of the women who use them. All that matters is that the work gets done, that the factory runs smoothly, that productivity remains high. The cost of all this, the addiction that quietly takes root in every worker, is invisible to those in power. They don't see the toll it takes on your body, your mind, your spirit. They don't see how the products they offer as solutions have become the very things that chain you to the factory floor. You begin to understand, slowly, how deeply this culture of pharmaceutical dependence has taken root. It's not just the factory floor that has adopted this practice. It's woven into the very fabric of your social life. The products that are sold to keep you working are marketed as solutions, as tools for productivity and efficiency. They are presented as harmless, as simply part of the rhythm of life for the working woman. The very culture of productivity, the idea that you must always be working, always be improving, always be pushing forward, has normalized the use of these substances. And as the cycle continues, you realize that addiction is no longer something hidden in the shadows. It is something that is accepted, even expected. The deeper you delve into this world, the more you see the structure that has been built around it. The factory, the employers, and the pharmaceutical companies have all become part of a system that perpetuates this cycle of dependency. The workers are encouraged to take these substances to increase their efficiency, to meet the demands of an economy that demands more and more from them. The companies that supply these drugs are not just making money, they are creating a culture of addiction, a culture in which the line between necessity and dependency is blurred beyond recognition. As the months pass, you begin to feel the weight of it all. The substances that were once sold to you as tools to ease your exhaustion and increase your productivity have now become the very thing that keeps you tethered to the job. You realize that you can no longer function without them, that your productivity, your ability to meet the demands of the factory, is entirely reliant on these substances. The factory floor has become a place of quiet suffering, where women are trapped in a cycle of dependency, all while society praises them for their ability to keep going, to keep working, to keep producing. And yet, as you sit at your station, you can't help but wonder, how long can this go on? How long can the cycle of dependency continue before it consumes you completely? You look around at the other women, their faces hollowed by exhaustion, their movements sluggish, their eyes glazed with the quiet fog of addiction. They, too, have become part of the system, and, like you, they are caught in a web that is difficult to escape. In this world, addiction is not a moral failing, it is a tool for survival. It is something that is accepted, even encouraged, as long as it keeps the wheels of industry turning. The workplace pharmaceutical culture has become so ingrained in the rhythm of daily life that it is no longer seen as a problem. It is simply part of the system, a necessary evil to keep everything functioning smoothly. But as you sit there, exhausted, dependent, you realize that this system has failed you and all the women like you. And though you may not have the power to change it, you can't ignore the growing sense of unease that tells you something needs to give, something has to change. The cycle cannot continue forever. And as you leave the factory at the end of another long day, the weight of the products you've taken, the toll they've taken on your body, is heavy in your chest. You walk into the night, but the question lingers. How long will you and the others continue to be caught in this cycle? How long before the cost of productivity becomes too great? You find yourself sitting in the dimly lit waiting room of a Victorian doctor's office. The heavy silence around you broken only by the occasional rustle of papers or the sound of a footstep in the hallway. The room is neat, almost sterile in its order, with a touch of elegance that suggests a long history of wealth and respectability. The scent of antiseptic hangs faintly in the air, but there's something else, a hidden unease that seems to settle in the corners of the room, a sense that the place, with all its polished surfaces and clinical detachment, is hiding something darker. You've come here with a quiet hope that this visit, this time, will be different. The exhaustion you've been feeling for weeks, the anxiety that tightens in your chest and never quite lets go, the endless fatigue that clings to your bones, all of it has become too much. The weight of society's expectations, the unspoken pressures to maintain composure and grace, have worn you down to the point where even the simple act of getting through the day feels like a monumental task. You know that something needs to change, but you're not sure what to expect from this visit. You're not sure that anyone can truly understand the quiet despair that has begun to seep into every part of your life. When the doctor finally calls your name, you follow him into his office with a mixture of hope and skepticism. He's a man of middle age, well-dressed and well-spoken, the kind of doctor whose presence exudes authority. As you sit across from him, he listens attentively, nodding as you explain the symptoms that have brought you here, your restlessness, your insomnia, the overwhelming anxiety that has become a constant companion, the deep fatigue that never seems to fade. You describe the toll it's taking on you, but you also know that his eyes are not seeing the full picture. You are a woman, and in the eyes of many men like him, your pain, your suffering, is often dismissed as something natural, something that comes with being a woman. He reassures you with a calm voice, telling you that these are common complaints, especially for women who are prone to the nervous afflictions that come with their delicate constitutions. His words are soft and measured, his demeanor reassuring, and his diagnosis is quick, too quick. You're simply overwrought, he says. A little rest, perhaps, and some medicine will do wonders for you. And with that, he prescribes the same treatment that so many other doctors have prescribed to countless women before you. Laudanum. A few drops a day, he says, will help you sleep, calm your nerves, and ease the anxiety that has begun to eat away at you. There's no mention of the potential risks, no acknowledgement of the dangers of addiction that lurk beneath the surface of this harmless remedy. There's no recognition that this prescription, given in the name of relief, may lead you down a path you'll never be able to escape. For now, though, you accept the prescription, hopeful that this will be the answer to your troubles. After all, the doctor has prescribed it, and the very authority of his position assures you that this will make it all better. What you don't realize, what no one has told you, is that this prescription, this little bottle of laudanum, will become the key to a cycle that you may never escape. It's a cycle that has ensnared countless women before you, a cycle that the medical community has been blind to. Doctors like the one you've just seen, many of whom are also dependent on these very substances, continue to prescribe them without understanding the long-term risks. There is no awareness of the growing addiction that these substances can create. There is no recognition of the psychological and physical toll that will eventually take hold. Instead, these opiates are seen as a solution, a way to soothe the fragile nature of women, a way to help them function in a world that demands so much. As the days pass, you begin to feel the relief you sought. The first few doses are like a balm to your weary soul. The tension in your body starts to fade, your mind quiets, and for the first time in a long time, you feel a sense of peace. The world, which had felt so overwhelming, suddenly feels manageable. The anxiety that had gripped your every moment begins to loosen its hold, and you can breathe again. The insomnia that had robbed you of your rest fades, and you sleep deeply through the night. For a time, the laudanum works exactly as promised. It is a miracle, a solution to the chaos in your life. But slowly, the relief begins to fade. What was once a dose that left you feeling calm and centered now seems to have less of an effect. You find yourself reaching for the bottle more often, taking more than you did before, chasing the sense of calm that once came so easily. The problem is subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Your mind becomes foggy, your energy starts to dip, and the once pleasant relief begins to feel more like a necessity. The anxiety, though dulled, never fully goes away, and you realize that the relief you sought has now become a part of your routine. What you don't know is that this is not an isolated experience. It is happening all around you, in the lives of other women who are quietly following the same path. The prescription that was supposed to help you has, over time, created a dependency that you cannot ignore. But here's the tragedy. The medical community, with all its authority, has no real understanding of addiction. They prescribe these substances without realizing the long-term consequences, without recognizing that they are setting the stage for a cycle of dependency that will be incredibly difficult to break. And what's worse, they fail to see the social context in which this is happening. You are a woman, and as a woman, your pain and suffering are often seen as part of your natural state, something that comes with your delicate constitution, something to be managed, not questioned. The idea that a woman could become addicted to a substance prescribed by a doctor seems almost unthinkable. After all, these are medications that have been accepted by society and endorsed by the medical profession. If a woman becomes dependent on them, it must be because she's weak. After all, she's overly emotional. After all, she simply cannot handle the stress of daily life. The truth, however, is more complicated. The addiction that grows out of these prescriptions is not a moral failing. It is the result of a medical system that failed to understand the true nature of addiction. The prescriptions that were supposed to heal are, in fact, the very things that trap women in a cycle of dependency. Doctors continue to prescribe these medications without seeing the bigger picture, without understanding how the very drugs they recommend are slowly taking control of their patients' lives. You begin to realize that the issue is not just about one woman's struggle. It's about a culture that has been built around the idea that women need to be fixed, that their pain and anxiety are something to be managed with drugs. The medical profession, with all its knowledge and prestige, has become complicit in perpetuating this cycle of dependency. Doctors, many of whom are also addicted to the same substances, fail to see the harm they are causing. The addiction is not something that can be easily identified, nor is it something that can be easily measured in a medical journal. It is something that grows slowly, insidiously, until one day you realize that the remedy that was supposed to make you better has become the thing that holds you captive. You begin to understand that the culture of addiction is not just a personal issue, it is a societal one. It is a system that has normalized the use of opiates, especially for women, and has failed to acknowledge the consequences. The medical community continues to endorse the use of these substances, despite the mounting evidence that they are creating a hidden epidemic. The very drugs that were supposed to offer relief have instead become the source of a deeper, more insidious problem. As you sit there, reflecting on your own experience, you can't help but wonder how many others are caught in the same web. How many women, like you, are quietly struggling with addiction, unable to break free from the grip of the very substances that were meant to help them. How many doctors, despite the evidence, continue to prescribe these drugs, blind to the damage they are causing. The realization settles heavily in your chest. The addiction that you feel creeping into your life is not just your own, it is a symptom of a larger problem, a medical system that has failed to see the true cost of its actions. And as you continue your journey through this world, you wonder, will anyone ever recognize the harm that has been done? Or will this silent epidemic continue to grow, unnoticed, unchecked, until it consumes even more lives? You walk through the door of a modest Victorian home. The familiar creak of the floorboards beneath your feet, a sound that has accompanied you through many years of domestic life. The house, though small, is warm, the hearth crackling with the remnants of a long day's work. The smell of cooking fills the air, and the soft murmur of voices from the other rooms suggests the usual rhythm of family life. But as you stand there, something feels different. Something is not quite right. The house feels quieter than usual, the warmth from the fire more distant, and the laughter that usually accompanies the evening seems muffled, as though it comes from a place far removed from this home. You step into the sitting room, where your family is gathered. There is your husband, seated in his chair by the fire, his gaze distant. The children are quieter than you remember, their faces looking older than their years. The room, which once felt alive with the chatter of family life, now feels subdued, as though the energy has been drained from it. Your husband looks up as you enter, his eyes tired, a shadow of frustration flickering in his expression. This scene is not unfamiliar to you. It has been like this for some time now, ever since the constant pressure of your daily responsibilities began to wear you down. You too have felt the weight of your role as wife and mother, the expectations of maintaining a household, caring for children, and supporting your husband all falling on your shoulders. The demands of society have been relentless, and despite your best efforts, you have begun to feel the strain in ways that are hard to ignore. And so, when the doctor prescribed you a tincture to soothe your nerves, to help you sleep, and relieve the fatigue that has taken root in your body, you accepted it, believing it to be a harmless remedy. At first, the tincture worked wonders. The fatigue that had clouded your days lifted. The anxiety that had been a constant companion began to fade, and you found a newfound sense of energy and composure. But now, as you sit in this room with your family, you realize that the relief you once felt has become a need that you can't shake, no matter how hard you try. The tincture that was once a remedy has turned into a necessity, a way to cope with the weight of the world around you. And now you're caught in a quiet trap, unable to break free from the cycle of dependence that has slowly taken hold of you. Your husband notices the subtle change in you. He's seen how you've become more distant, how the spark that once defined your spirit has been replaced with a quiet resignation. He doesn't understand it, not completely. To him, your dependence on the tincture is just another part of the routine, another way for you to get through the day. But he's noticed something else too, the toll it's taking on the family. He watches as the once vibrant woman he married becomes more subdued, more isolated. The children have begun to notice it too. The way you're not as present with them as you used to be. The way your energy seems to evaporate as soon as the bottle is emptied. The house, which once rang with the sound of your laughter and the warmth of your love, now feels colder, more distant. The strain is becoming impossible to ignore. You see the toll it takes on your husband, his patience wearing thin as he picks up the pieces of what once felt like a whole family. He steps in to help with the children, but it's not the same. The connection that once existed between the two of you feels frayed, as though something essential is slipping away, piece by piece. His frustration grows, but so does his sense of helplessness. What can he do when the very source of your struggle is something he cannot see, something that has silently crept into your life, into your very being? The children, too, are affected. They don't understand why you are so tired all the time, why you seem distracted, why you are not as involved in their lives as you once were. They see the changes, but they don't have the words to describe them. Instead, they simply feel it like an invisible weight pressing down on them. They are children, but they sense the shift in the atmosphere, the way the house is no longer the sanctuary it once was. They sense the tension that clings to the air, the quiet unease that permeates every corner of your home. And as the days go on, you realize that the cycle of dependency is no longer just your own. It has become a family issue, one that touches everyone in ways that are impossible to ignore. You try to hide it, try to keep up appearances, but the truth is that your addiction is becoming more than just a private struggle. It is impacting your ability to function as a mother, a wife, and a caretaker. The expectations of you as a woman to maintain the home, to nurture the family, to keep everything running smoothly are slipping away, replaced by a quiet, hidden need for the very substance that was meant to help you. Your children begin to sense that something is wrong. At first, they don't know what it is. They just know that their mother isn't the same. The once vibrant woman who would sing them songs before bed, who would bake cookies and help with their homework, is now distant, her energy gone. They watch as you retreat more and more into yourself, retreating into the bottle that has become your source of comfort and escape. The family unit, once strong, is now being destabilized by something unseen, something that no one talks about but that everyone feels. The addiction has quietly seeped into the heart of your family, poisoning the foundation of trust and connection that once held you together. The tragic part is that your children are not just witnessing your struggle, they are being shaped by it. In the same way that you once relied on the tincture to numb your emotional and physical pain, your children begin to learn that the way to cope with life's difficulties is through substances. They don't understand it fully, but they see it. They see that their mother, once so full of life, now turns to a bottle to find relief. And though they may not realize it, they begin to internalize the patterns of behavior that come with dependency. They watch you. They listen to the hushed conversations between you and your husband. And they begin to learn that addiction, in its many forms, is something to be tolerated, even normalized. It becomes a part of the fabric of your home, a hidden part of your family dynamics that no one is willing to confront. As the years pass, the legacy of this addiction is passed down. Your children grow up with the unspoken understanding that life can be difficult, that pain and exhaustion are part of the human experience, and that sometimes, to get through it, you need something to help you cope. For them, The culture of dependency has become something that feels normal, something they are conditioned to accept. They don't have the language to express their feelings, but they know that their family is not like other families. They know that something is different, that their mother's struggle has shaped the way they see the world and the way they will live their own lives. And so, the cycle continues. The addiction that was once hidden in the corners of your life has spread, silently infecting the very structure of your family. It has become a part of the narrative, a story that is passed down from one generation to the next, shaping how your children view the world, how they cope with their own struggles, and how they relate to their own families when they grow up. The pattern of addiction, though not always visible, is now ingrained in the fabric of your family's story, and its effects will be felt long after the laudanum has been replaced by other substances. The medical community, despite its growing understanding of addiction in other contexts, has failed to see the full scope of the damage it has caused. It continues to prescribe opiates, continuing the cycle of dependency, unaware of the toll it is taking on families like yours. The once innocent use of these substances, intended to offer relief, has created a hidden culture of addiction, one that quietly tears apart the very fabric of family life. And as you sit in the quiet of your home, watching your children grow and change, you can't help but feel the weight of what has transpired. You are a mother, a wife, and a woman who has struggled in silence, who has fought to keep everything together, even as the quiet grip of addiction has slowly taken hold. And as you look at your family, you wonder, what will the future hold? Will they continue the cycle, or will they break free? Will they be able to unlearn the patterns of behavior that have been passed down to them, or will they carry the weight of this legacy into their own lives? The once strong family is now fragile, its foundation eroded by addiction and the quiet suffering that has been hidden for so long. And as you look at your children, you realize that the true cost of this addiction is not just what it has done to you, it's what it has done to the ones you love. The damage is done, and its effects will ripple through your family for years to come. And though you long to break free, you know that the road to recovery is long, and the weight of this burden may never fully be lifted. You find yourself walking through the crowded streets of Victorian London, the clang of horse-drawn carriages and the murmur of the city around you, a constant backdrop to your thoughts. The city, with its towering buildings and rapid industrialization, feels alive with progress. But underneath the surface, a storm is quietly brewing. You can feel it in the whispers that rise in every corner of society, in the hushed tones of conversations that touch on an issue that has become impossible to ignore. Addiction. For years, this has been a silent epidemic, one that has crept into the lives of countless women like you. The opium-based tinctures, the soothing elixirs that were once handed out as remedies for nervousness, insomnia, and fatigue, have now become something much darker. They are no longer just a way to cope. They are a quiet, pervasive force that has taken hold of the lives of women, altering their family dynamics, their health, and their futures. But now, the conversation is changing. People are starting to notice. The addiction that was once whispered about behind closed doors is now being talked about openly, and there is growing pressure for action. As you walk through the streets, the newspapers you pass by tell the story of a growing outrage. The use of opium-based remedies has reached alarming levels, and the medical community, which once saw these substances as harmless, is now being forced to reckon with the consequences. Women, once seen as the delicate, fragile sex, are no longer content to suffer in silence. They are speaking out, testifying to the damage these drugs have done to their lives, to their families, to their very sense of self. The doctors who once prescribed them so freely are now being held accountable, their practices questioned by the public. It is no longer enough to simply acknowledge the problem. Something must be done. The pressure for reform is mounting, and it is coming from every corner of society. Legal challenges are being filed, public outrage is growing, and there is a new, louder call for regulation. The tide of opinion is shifting, and the voices of those who have suffered the most are being heard. You, like so many others, are caught up in the wave of change, aware that the very substances that were once seen as remedies are now being called into question. They are no longer seen as harmless. They are seen as a threat. In the halls of power, lawmakers begin to take notice. There are heated debates, passionate speeches, and, most importantly, the beginnings of legal action. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 begins to take shape, a piece of legislation that will change the course of history. It is not just about regulating food and medicine. It is about protecting people, particularly women, from the hidden dangers that have been allowed to flourish unchecked. For the first time, the public is demanding transparency, demanding accountability from the pharmaceutical industry, and demanding that the medical community take responsibility for the harm it has caused. The legal challenges are not without resistance. The pharmaceutical industry, with its vast wealth and influence, fights back, defending its right to sell its products without interference. After all, these products have been part of society for decades. They are ingrained in daily life, accepted as part of the fabric of Victorian society. The idea that these substances could be dangerous, addictive, or harmful seems unthinkable to those who have profited from their sale. But the tide is turning. The voices of those who have been harmed by these products, the women who have suffered in silence for so long, cannot be ignored. You see it in the newspapers, in the pamphlets being passed around the streets, in the public meetings where women, once silenced by shame, now speak boldly about their experiences. Their stories are heartbreaking. They talk about the promise of relief, the hope they had when they were first prescribed the tinctures and tonics, and the slow realization that they had become dependent on the very substances that were supposed to help them. They speak of the damage done to their families, to their health, to their sense of self, and they demand change. The demand for regulation grows louder with every passing day. The pressure for reform reaches its peak, and in 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act is passed. It is a momentous victory for those who have fought for transparency and regulation in the pharmaceutical industry. The law requires that all ingredients in food and medicine be listed on labels, allowing consumers to make informed choices about the products they are purchasing. No longer will the public be in the dark about what they are consuming. No longer will the pharmaceutical industry be allowed to profit from substances that have caused so much harm. As you hear the news of the laws passing, you feel a strange sense of relief. It's not enough to undo the damage that has been done, not enough to erase the years of suffering that so many women, like you, have endured. But it is a step forward, a recognition that something needed to be done, a shift in the culture that has allowed addiction to flourish in the shadows. The law is a first step, but it is also a beginning. It is the beginning of a movement that will push for more reforms, more transparency, and more accountability in the world of pharmaceuticals. It is the beginning of a recognition that addiction is not just a moral failing, but a disease that requires compassion, care, and reform. The passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act does not bring an end to the problem, but it is a turning point. The medical community, once so blind to the dangers of opiates, begins to shift its perspective. Doctors are forced to confront the reality of addiction and its impact on their patients. No longer can they dismiss it as a personal failing or a moral weakness. It is a medical issue, one that requires treatment, understanding, and care. You reflect on the long road that has brought society to this point, and you realize that the journey is far from over. The passing of the Pure Food and Drug Act is just one step in a larger battle. The fight for regulation and reform will continue, and more laws will be passed, more voices will be raised, and more lives will be saved. The pharmaceutical industry, once unregulated and unchecked, will be held to account for the damage it has caused. And the public, once blind to the dangers, will demand more transparency, more responsibility, and more oversight. As you walk through the streets of London, the weight of the past feels a little lighter. The burden of addiction, of secrecy, of shame, is slowly beginning to lift. The conversation has shifted, the awareness has grown, and the first steps have been taken toward a future where the public's health is protected and where addiction is no longer ignored or dismissed. There is still much to be done, but for the first time in a long while, you feel a glimmer of hope. The road ahead is long, but the fight for regulation and reform has begun, and it will continue until the damage done is fully acknowledged and the damage is finally healed. As you step out into the modern world, you find that the streets are filled with the same hurried rhythm of life. Yet there is a stark contrast between this world and the one that once felt so distant in the Victorian era. The clang of carriages has been replaced by the hum of cars, and the air smells of 100 different perfumes and exhaust fumes, a cacophony of modern life that drowns out the murmur of history. Yet, beneath the surface of this bustling, fast-paced world, there is an unsettling sense that something has not changed, that certain patterns still run deep, like a river that refuses to dry up. You've read about the Victorian opium epidemic, about the addiction that gripped so many women like you, as the tinctures, the tonics, the soothing relief promised by opiates slowly morphed into a cycle of dependency. And as you walk through these modern streets, it occurs to you that perhaps the most painful lesson of the Victorian era, the devastating consequences of unchecked drug use, is a lesson we have not fully learned. The opioid crisis of today is a grim echo of what happened more than a century ago. The faces have changed, the names of the drugs have shifted, but the pattern remains remarkably similar. In fact, it is chilling to think how much of the history of the opium epidemic, with its stories of dependence and misuse, is playing out once again. This time, it's not just the women of high society quietly slipping into addiction in the drawing rooms of their grand homes. It's everywhere, in the suburban neighborhoods, in the cities, in the small towns, affecting people of every walk of life, from teenagers to middle-aged professionals. You begin to think about the root causes. It wasn't just the accessibility of opium-based tinctures or the lack of knowledge about their addictive properties that created the epidemic in Victorian times. It was also the way society viewed addiction. The societal pressures to maintain an image of perfect composure, to uphold the ideal of a well-functioning, unflappable woman, were powerful forces. Women were expected to manage their emotions, to handle the heavy burdens of domestic life with grace and dignity, and to do so without showing any signs of struggle. The addiction that began with a well-meaning prescription or a simple solution to everyday stress morphed into something far darker, something that was ignored or excused as part of the fragile nature of being a woman. In modern times, addiction still carries with it many of the same stigmas. There are still whispers in the shadows, still hushed conversations in dark corners where people talk about how addiction is something to be ashamed of, something to hide. Even now, addiction is often seen as a moral failure, a lack of willpower, something that only happens to people who have lost control. In the midst of the modern opioid crisis, where prescription painkillers have become the gateway to heroin and fentanyl, there remains an uncomfortable truth. Addiction is still a struggle that many people have to fight in silence, their stories misunderstood or dismissed. You think about the faces behind the statistics, the thousands of people who, like the women of Victorian society, were sold a solution to their pain, only to find themselves caught in a cycle of dependency that no one warned them about. How many of them started with a simple prescription for pain, just like the women who were given laudanum all those years ago? how many of them were told that the very drug they needed to relieve their suffering would, in the end, be the thing that kept them trapped. The similarities are striking, but as much as the story feels like one of despair, you also know that it's not one of hopelessness. After all, history has a way of teaching us, even when the lessons come with pain. In the aftermath of the Victorian opium epidemic, there were changes, slow, hard-fought changes that ultimately led to regulations, to the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, and to a greater awareness of the dangers of pharmaceutical misuse. But even then, it took years, even decades, to shift the conversation, to acknowledge that addiction wasn't simply a personal weakness, it was a medical issue that required treatment, care, and understanding. Modern addiction treatment, too, has come a long way. There are now more tools than ever for people who are struggling with addiction: rehabilitation programs, therapy, medical interventions, and harm reduction strategies. The awareness of addiction as a disease, rather than a moral failing, has made a significant difference in how it is treated. There is a greater emphasis on compassion, on treating the root causes of addiction, whether it's trauma, chronic pain, or mental health disorders, instead of simply offering quick fixes or stigmatizing those who are suffering. But despite the progress, there remain significant hurdles. The stigma surrounding addiction still runs deep, and societal pressures often continue to shape how addiction is viewed. People who are struggling with addiction, whether it's to prescription painkillers, alcohol, or other substances, are still often seen as weak or flawed, even as the medical community recognizes addiction as a complex and multifaceted disease. This stigma can prevent people from seeking help, from getting the treatment they need, and from speaking openly about their struggles. And then there is the matter of accessibility. While there are many more resources available today than in the past, addiction treatment is still out of reach for many. Insurance doesn't always cover the costs of rehab, and those who are most vulnerable, those from lower income backgrounds or marginalized communities, are often left without the support they need. The opioid crisis, in particular, has highlighted the disparities in healthcare, where wealthier individuals have more access to treatment and care, while others are left to suffer in silence, caught in the grip of addiction with little to no help. As you think about all of this, you begin to realize how deeply connected the past is to the present. The lessons learned from the Victorian opium epidemic have, in many ways, been forgotten, or at least ignored by those who hold the power to make change. The same patterns of overprescription, of pharmaceutical companies profiting from human suffering, and of society's refusal to fully acknowledge the impact of addiction continue to play out in modern times. The difference now is that we have the knowledge, the research, and the resources to do something about it. The question, as always, is whether we will learn from history or repeat its mistakes. You think about the many faces of addiction: those who struggle with opioid use, those who battle alcohol dependence, and those who wrestle with other forms of substance abuse. You think about the women of Victorian England, who were caught in the same cycle of dependency, and how their stories have echoed through time, showing that addiction is not just a personal issue, but a societal one. The fight for better regulation, for greater awareness, and for more compassionate care is far from over. But the first step, as it always has been, is to confront the reality of addiction and to stop hiding it in the shadows. As you continue to walk through the streets of the modern world, you realize that while we may have made progress, there is still much to be done. The lessons of the past should not be forgotten. They should be the foundation on which we build a better future. The opioid crisis is not just a modern issue. It is a continuation of the same struggles that women in the past faced, and it requires the same commitment to change, to compassion, and to understanding. You wonder, as you look around at the faces of those who pass by, How many of them are fighting a silent battle with addiction? How many of them are struggling with pain, with trauma, with pressures that no one sees, and turning to substances to cope, just as the women of the past once did? The fight against addiction is ongoing, and it requires not just treatment but a fundamental shift in how we view the problem. It requires compassion, understanding, and the courage to confront the uncomfortable truths that continue to shape our world. As you step into the future, you carry with you the knowledge that while the fight may be long and difficult, it is not one that we fight alone. We fight it together, learning from the past, and striving to create a world where addiction is no longer hidden in the shadows. Those who struggle are met with care, and the lessons of history finally shape a better, more compassionate future. As you reflect on the Victorian opium epidemic, a chilling realization settles in. It was not just a chapter in history, it was a stark revelation of how deeply pharmaceutical culture, gender expectations, and societal norms can intersect, often in dangerous ways. In a time when women were expected to carry the weight of domestic duties, public respectability, and emotional composure, the pharmaceutical industry quickly became a silent partner in maintaining the illusion of perfect femininity. With doctors prescribing opiates to women for the most common of complaints, nervousness, fatigue, and emotional distress, it seemed like a solution. But in reality, it was a dangerous catalyst for dependency that would ripple through generations. This epidemic, hidden behind the facades of genteel homes and polite social gatherings, revealed much more than a medical failure. It exposed a societal blind spot that allowed addiction to thrive unnoticed, particularly among women. Society, so eager to uphold the ideal of the composed, graceful woman, never once paused to question the costs of those idealized roles, the physical and emotional toll that came with them. Addiction became the unseen consequence, the hidden price of the Victorian woman's struggle to meet these impossible expectations. Yet, this epidemic didn't simply disappear with the passing of time. Its legacy lingers, shaping modern understandings of addiction. Today, the opioid crisis, with its patterns of misuse, overprescription, and dependency, is a direct descendant of what began more than a century ago. The awareness and regulation of pharmaceuticals, while significantly improved, still struggle to contend with the deep-rooted stigma and the cultural pressures that surround addiction. The cycle of dependency that was so starkly exposed during the Victorian era continues to repeat itself, now affecting people from all walks of life and reminding us of the lessons we've yet to fully learn. In the midst of all this, the stigma surrounding addiction remains as prevalent as ever. Women, in particular, still face the brunt of this societal judgment. In the Victorian era, addiction was often dismissed as a moral failing, something that only weak women succumb to. Today, the stigma still hovers, forcing those who struggle with addiction to suffer in silence, often unseen or misunderstood. The silence and secrecy that enveloped addiction then still haunt us today, impeding progress and healing for those affected by substance use. The irony of the Victorian opium epidemic is painfully clear. It was a medical failure, yes, but it was also a societal blind spot, camouflaged behind the mask of respectability and moral expectations. A problem so significant was allowed to flourish because it was hidden beneath the surface of the idealized, seemingly perfect lives of women. The addiction that bloomed from this denial remains one of the greatest failures of that time, a failure that still echoes through the opioid crisis we face today. History often buries its greatest crises. The lessons learned are frequently forgotten or ignored until they resurface again, with even more devastating consequences. The opium epidemic of Victorian England is a perfect example of this. Its roots have taken hold in the present, showing us just how difficult it is to break the cycle of dependency once it has been allowed to grow unchecked. As we continue to fight addiction today, We must not forget the lessons of the past. We must look back, confront the truth of what happened, and use that understanding shaping a future where addiction is not hidden in the shadows, but is treated with the care, understanding, and respect it deserves. If you found this exploration of history's hidden stories insightful, don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth dives into the untold chapters of the past. Share your thoughts in the comments. What historical events do you think have shaped our understanding of addiction? And remember, as you rest tonight, to reflect on the world of history that surrounds us. There's so much more to uncover together.